And I'm looking at Andrew, right, because we've got some additional technical items to address.
Good evening, everybody. I am Andrew McNichol, Community Development Director from Town Hall staff. To my right is Senior Planner Mary Benedetto. Down the hall is Economic Development Director Ben Cares, who's running our overflow room. And tonight, for the Cpdc meeting of December 18th, 2023, we have from the board here Chair John Weston, Vice Chair Tony Diarezzo, members Mark Wetzel, Heather Klisch, and Hillary Mateve. Tom Armstrong is absent today, but I'm sure he will catch up to speed. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that this is a hybrid meeting. We have many participants here in person, and we have many participants over the Zoom. We're going to try to follow the typical procedure where the applicant, in a twist of fashion tonight is me, for the most part, presents the application, does their presentation. We'll likely try to open up to board and public comment after that for a few minutes and public comment, but we may have to limit that portion to a few minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, so that we can get into the bylaw, where we can get into more of the specifics of the proposal and see how it works in the zoning bylaw. So we're going to be pretty intuitive with this. We'll try to play it by ear, but the hope is that we can get to the bylaw, get through it. So if you are making public comment, please raise your hand so that the chair can acknowledge you. Please speak your name and address into the public record. If you are using the Zoom features, please use the raise hand feature found under reactions, or if you have your camera on, simply wave your hand and we'll try to find you through the many staff keeping their eye on the Zoom, and that way we can get to your public comment. So there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of people on Zoom. We'll do our best to try to capture everybody. I'll defer to
Sure. Date
Is
procedure.
your intention to limit the 100+ attendees here tonight to 15 minutes?
It is not my intention. It is to try to get to the bylaw so we can discuss the zoning proposal as well, and how it works into the bylaw, and open up the Q&A with in between that and after that as well. So
Can we forego the presentation, assuming that most, if not all of us, have already seen the documentation and understand what you're attempting to present to us, so that we can have additional time for public comment?
No, I think we do really need to set the stage, because some may have and
right.
plenty may not.
There's context to it, so it's not a long presentation. You know, we'll try to keep it to 20 minutes or less. But and then we'll
the point, and Andrew and I talked about this. The point in trying to keep the initial comments sort of to clarification comments is because, right, we do have, and I think you'll go over this, we have numerous public hearings. We do, over the next couple of months, we do need to get into the meat of the proposal, which is the zoning language. It's very dry. Zoning language is dry, but we do need to get into those details, because those details matter a lot. And so this may or may not be the forum to opine for everyone about whether they like it or not, right? Because we do need to get through to define what it is, and that's what we're hoping to do tonight. There's other public hearings we're going to have where we can get more into whether what we're proposing, because we don't have what is being proposed fully baked yet. So we need to get that first, then we can move on to public comment. The intent here is not to stifle public comment. This board always, that's what we're here for. We just need to make sure that it's focused on the job at hand for tonight.
So a question relative to that, if what you're working on tonight is for sure zoning language can be dry and ponderous. Is that language going to be tied to any specific map, for example, the one that we have in our hands now? Does it have to be tied to that map?
So we'll get into the map.
Yes.
there an answer there?
We'll get into that, as part of the presentation.
So the language you're gonna discuss later, after the presentation and public comment, is fundamental to the map that you're presenting? So it can't be any other map, is that what you're saying?
Okay,
So
let's
we'll
get
into it
into
after.
the presentation, and then we can
And I
answer
think
those
that
questions.
therein lies the need for a public comment.
As was said, we'll entertain clarifying questions and comments.
Good?
Entertaining.
Get started right away. We are already buttoned.
Yeah, do we have a notice?
Yes, if you could please read that into the record.
I can find it.
Yeah, it's.
You turn the lights a bit, maybe?
I don't think these lights dim, unfortunately. I can only turn these ones off.
I can read it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm just reading the notice of public hearing into the record. Notice is hereby given that under MGL Chapter 40A, Section 5, the Reading Community Planning and Development Commission will hold a public hearing in the Select Board's meeting room at Reading Town Hall, 16 Lowell Street, Reading, Massachusetts, on Monday, December 18th, 2023 at 7:30 p.m. to consider the following proposed zoning bylaw amendments in advance of the April 2024 annual town meeting. To allow single-family, two-family, and multifamily housing uses in a newly proposed zoning district to be approximately located in the area within 0.5 miles of the Reading MBTA commuter rail station by amending the existing zoning district boundaries and the following sections of the zoning bylaw. Section 2.0 definitions, Section 3.0 establishment of districts, Section 4.0 administration, Section 5.0 use regulations, and Table 5.3.2 table of uses for residence districts, Section 6.0 intensity regulations, and Table 6.3 table of dimensional controls, and Section 9.0 parking, as well as by the insertion of a new Section 5.7 inclusionary zoning regulations with all subsequent sections of Section 5.7 numbered accordingly. Amendments to zoning bylaw Appendix C, zoning map, are also under consideration, which will define the location of the newly proposed zoning district. Complete drafts of the proposed amendments are available to the public in the Public Services Department in Town Hall and on the town website the Thursday prior to the hearing date.
Thank you, Heather. So again, I'm Andrew McNichol, Community Development Director. I'm going to jump right into the presentation so we can get to Q&A as well. So I hope I'm not blocking your view too much. But so we're here tonight to provide a quick overview and a presentation on the law and concept of MBTA communities, as well as our specific proposed zoning map and concept, which is all still in draft form, open to public comment and open to evolution. So I just want to make that clear from the beginning. And we certainly want public comment and general Q&A. We're going to ask all attendees to remember that there are a range of housing views here in Reading, and to keep in mind that these hearings are part of the iterative process that we've been undergoing for 6+ months now and have been working through with much public engagement. So we do ask that you try to keep your questions focused and specific to the proposal, and not so much about whether or not Reading should comply with MBTA communities, because that will be a vote up to town meeting that we'll get to in 2024, but certainly all public comment is warranted. So to quickly start, what is MBTA communities law? It's a law that was passed in 2021 at the state level. The state is requiring that up to 177 municipalities remove barriers around development for multifamily housing in their zoning bylaw around their transit-oriented stations, and that can range from subways to buses to commuter rails. Here in Reading, we are classified as a commuter rail community, which means that half of our zoning district has to be within the half mile of the Reading Depot that's located downtown. We have to reach compliance by 2024 and confirm to the state that we have a district with by right zoning capacity for about 1,500 units across a density of 15 units per acre. Our minimum district size requirement is 43 acres. I just want to start to kind of give some regional context, right? This law was proposed and passed in efforts because Massachusetts growth has far exceeded its housing development pace. So that's a lot, there's a lot of context behind that, but in short, the housing shortage is part of the reason and a strong reason why the state looked to pass this law to a range of communities with a range of different needs. Oops, wrong button, so typical to do. So why are we changing, yep.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm getting a bunch of texts from some neighbors saying that the sound on the TV is not on.
I would probably have to defer to my guy from RCTV, but
Sorry, I just wanted to let you know.
thank you, no, that's good, just to, it was off for the first 15 minutes, just to be clear, because we're trying to set up and get everybody situated.
I'm looking into it, but I'm gonna.
He's looking into it.
Yes.
Okay.
First I've heard it. I
Alright.
have sound in here, so the recording is.
Okay, I hope it's up to date now, we started like 10 minutes late, and I think that's probably where the comments were directed at, that people couldn't hear.
That's not fair though for all the people who can't be here for you.
Let me clarify what he said, is that he has sound in there, he's confident there's sound on the recording, and he's looking into it so people can look into it, so people can hear it from home. There is also the Zoom meeting, so anybody can join, that was in the public notice, so people can join by Zoom.
And this is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube and our webpage as well. Continuing on, why are we changing our zoning? It's because Reading does not currently have a compliant district that meets all of those items that I just described. So in order to comply, no matter where we propose to do it, we have to propose a new zoning district that we can use for compliance sake. We are allowed to choose how we comply as long as our numbers meet the state requirements, and that's the evolution that we've taken to date and how we got here. So we kicked off our public process in June with a survey to provide staff with the initial direction and the type of multifamily housing that community members would be most amenable to in terms of scale, use, density, and other. So in our series of public events from September to November, we've also presented and refined this proposal over and over again, and the shapes and the maps and some of the district controls. So it's really been an evolved process based off public comment and feedback, which we're very supportive of and love to have, and it's been a great engaging series so far, and we love to see this type of effort from the community. So existing conditions of Reading zoning, just to describe the zoning district a little bit that we have currently. 94% of land in Reading is zoned for single family only. That's the pink and purple you see all around this map. That's our single family zoning districts, S15, S20, and S40. We have 1% of land in Reading dedicated for multifamily housing use, and that's the light blue that you can see just around here, in and around some corners, and the A80 down at Gazebo Circle. 5% of land is zoned for commercial uses, industrial, business A down South Main Street, and business B. There's a little portion of each in and around, but it's just 5% of land. So when we had started the MBTA communities process, we heard pretty loud and clear that trying to keep our commercial districts viable for commercial and not housing was a good intent of the community. So that's why a large focus of ours, our current proposal, is based around residential uses and land. So that's where we've ended up through the multiple different ways of feedback that we've gotten. We also think that it's important to remember our broadening housing goals that these zoning changes relate to. It's not just compliance sake, there is also broader housing goals that we've established over the last decade or so. Reading's housing goals in its master plan and its housing production plans has continuously stated that Reading will provide a variety of housing types for a diverse population. Elderly, renters, first-time home buyers, empty nesters, and others will be able to find homes that meet their needs. Providing these types of housings are set to accomplish by improving the town's regulations to more easily allow for housing development. And this is also backed up in the data through the census and underlying metrics. Over the course of the last few years, you might have seen that home prices have skyrocketed. The median price of a home in Reading is $815,000 today, and the median household income is $133,000. To afford the median priced home, you have to make upwards of $200,000 to afford the median home in Reading. So we have a shortfall there. 12% of Reading residents are disabled, and 73% of those are elderly, age 65 plus. Reading has just over 9,000 households home in its community, about a third of which, just over, have children under 18, and about half of which are households that include 60 plus residents. Both of those population projections are anticipated to increase in the future, and so housing goals and housing regulation is set to achieve the variety of housing stocks for young and upcoming families to be able to afford a home in Reading, and for aging citizens to be able to downsize in place if they wish so that they can stay in Reading. And that's a priority focus of ours and a priority need so that we can make sure we're addressing the wide range of our community members, that your sons and daughters could hope to live in Reading as well, that you can stay in Reading. So variety of housing is where we come down to on that. Creating housing options for both is a top priority. And on if this works. So when we start to think about multifamily housing in Reading, to get back to some of the law requirements, we'll start at multifamily defined. Multifamily housing is any housing with at least 3 units on a single lot. All of these are examples of multifamily housing in and around that in the half-mile radius of downtown. And all of these are substantially similar to the forms of multifamily housing that we would like to look to allow for in our current proposal. It's not, multifamily housing is not always the mid-rise, high-dense development that you may see down at Reading Woods. Downtown, if you think of that as high-dense. So there are a wide range of multifamily housing options and we're focused around smaller scaled forms that substantially are similar to single-family homes. So we'll get into that in a bit as well. But one more aspect of the law that is important to consider is the requirement that it be by right development. By right development means that a project requires no waivers, special permits, variances, or other discretionary approvals that an applicant would have to face and overcome for their housing proposal. Projects are still required as multifamily housing projects to go through site plan review, which is a public hearing process to review the site plans of any proposed application and get public hearing, get public comment, get board comment, get staff comment, and capture everything that we would hope to capture in a site plan approval. It is a by right process, but there is a public hearing process to it that multifamily is not exempt from. And why is this important? It's important because if a lot cannot be developed by right, it doesn't count within our compliance model that the state has set out. In order for the lot to be developed by right, it must meet the minimum lot size and frontage requirements of the district so that that lot could be considered by right in the underlying zoning. A vast majority of our lots, 90+%, do not meet today's current single family standards or A40 standards. We are vastly non-conforming lots in Reading, which is typical of a number of communities in and around the region. If you're okay, I'll grab a question of a hand that shot up.
Sure.
A quick clarifying question, the previous slide with those 3-family houses, those are all currently zoned single family?
Can you please repeat the question?
The question was if these 3 houses are all currently zoned single family. I believe all of them are located in the S15 district.
So in terms of compliance with the law, these all count as 1 unit each, even though they're.
Yes, and we'll get to that in just a second, so thank you. But yes, so these are multifamily units under the law, they count as 1, and we'll get to that actually probably right now.
One quick note, since we are actually in the official meeting, if you could please give us your name and address when you do make a question. Yes, please.
John Sullivan, 23 Western Road.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
So that's why by right development is important, and we'll get to how we got to our dimensional controls to allow for that in just a minute. So why would development not be right? And that's because the lot or use doesn't meet the current standards of the zone. So for example, and this is something we've presented multiple times, so I'll quickly run through it, but this is the A40 zone just northeast of our downtown, our predominant multifamily housing zone. To develop multifamily housing in our multifamily housing zone, you need a minimum square footage lot of 40,000 square feet. There is just one lot, this lot here in orange, that meets that minimum requirement. So the rest of the lots in our multifamily housing zone could not be developed by right for multifamily housing. So that's just one underlying reason why by right is important. John, I'm just gonna grab other.
John Arena, 26 Francis. But in that section, could you combine multiple parcels to achieve the minimum lot size?
You could, as with any zoning
So you
district.
could build in there subject to developing more than one parcel.
You could, but the state tool looks at the lots as they exist today, and that's how they're measured. If they are non-conforming to the use, they are kicked out and counted as a unit capacity of 0. So, yes, things could happen, but in terms of the compliance, it's based on what exists today.
But that's only the compliance. If they were developed, they would count to your inventory, true?
So we're gonna get into unit capacity right now, huh? We'll jump forward.
And then I think the intention, right, was to, after the presentation, have those 15 minutes for
Right.
clarifying questions. That's, and then do more presentation and then more public comment.
So we'll jump into unit capacity because that's the number that everybody jumps to. The law requires requires zoning compliance, not construction. No construction nor required build out is, nor required builds are required. I'm saying that twice over, but zoning importantly does not impact what is currently built. It is only for future development. Zoning regulates future development, future additions, future proposals. None of the zoning capacity is based on what exists today. So the state requires that the number of units, which for us is just under 1,500 minimum, for us to zone for in the zoning capacity. Zoning capacity takes each parcel in the district at large as if it were a blank canvas, and it applies what's maximally allowed under the zoning. So it really is just a simplified metric for the state to help ensure that any zoning that is proposed is not overly restrictive in terms of the housing development. But zoning capacity, again, is not a build-out projection, it's not a requirement, it's just a number used that the state takes as a broad number to look to ensure that a municipality is not overly restricting multifamily housing in whatever zone they propose. And we'll give a quick example of that. So zoning capacity in the real world, this is an example we've given before. This building here is Lincoln Prescott Reading Village, right across from the depot. It was a 40B project located in the S15 zone. It is 68 units, 20 to 25% of which are affordable. Because this lot more specifically is zoned single family, it is counted as a unit capacity of 1. Zoning capacity does not take into what exists in the built environment, it takes into what is allowable under the zoning district. The zoning district allows just single family uses, so no matter the lot size, it's a one unit capacity under the state's compliance metric.
I'm gonna stop you for a minute, cause that's a hard one.
It is a hard one.
I think that's very
Yeah.
important for people to understand, cause that's crucial to
Yes.
what's being done here, so.
Are we talking 1,500 multi-family buildings? Let's call them buildings, right? Like, so even if they were maybe not buildings, but you have to put 3 units in for it to count as one multi-family housing unit? Like 3 homes in for it to count as one multi-family.
So again, it doesn't, and if I could ask for your name and record for
Ron
the
Apples,
address.
yeah.
Yep. The zoning does not look for what is built, whether existing or newly proposed. It's not about what is built or proposed to be built, it's about what the zoning allows on a lot. So we're gonna get to our proposal in a second, but our proposal says you can do 22 units on a lot, proposed maximum. And so if that lot size, which can range, call it 5,000 square feet for the 3 units. So a 5,000 square foot lot would have a unit capacity of 3. Even if that lot maintains a single family home for the rest of time, the unit capacity would be 3 because in essence, that's what the zoning would allow for. There's no requirement to build 3 units. It's just the unit capacity of it.
Very quick clarifying question. I think you just stated that the unit capacity is only 1 throughout this zone,
Throughout
by
the
and large,
pink. Yep.
correct?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
That's how the state counts it right now,
Right.
as 1.
Because there's
Right.
single family zone.
And it's
Right.
1 per compliant lot.
Yeah.
So, by the way, Dave Talbot, 75 Linden Street. I just want to clarify that there's in the zoning, if your house is older than 1942, it could be a 2-family as of right. And in some correspondence in the past week, I learned that the town doesn't have any data on how many well, how many houses there even are that are pre-1942, but the unit capacity is now 2 already for every house that's
No,
that's
no, it doesn't matter,
No.
that's the thing, right? This is, this is, as Andrew said, this is a blank canvas exercise that the state created for, all MBTA communities that says if you have a parcel this big and you have zoning that allows by right, it doesn't matter what's on there today. It doesn't matter that your house or that big, the big multifamily, like whatever is allowed on that parcel using by right zoning is what
Right.
what's calculated.
I'm saying
as
by
the-
right zoning allows 2 units.
No, it does not.
If it's below, if it's older than 1942 with 8 habitable rooms, it's in the
If
zoning
I
bylaw.
may explain. If you tear that house down.
Yep.
You can put up 1 unit. That's what the state counts. So the fact that you have a house on there from 1942 or before
Yep.
doesn't matter to the state.
Well, a tweak to the existing zoning would allow that
Doesn't-
to be
no,
done as a.
no, it does
No,
not.
it doesn't.
Because it is by the lot, not the building.
Anyway, there's a lot more housing out there than you think there is. The town doesn't have data on this 2-family, anyway, just.
But this is a really important clarifying question, is that the actual housing inventory is different from the zoning capacity. So truly, I think Tony's example was really good. Am I getting this
Yes,
right?
yeah,
That
yeah.
basically, if you were to tear down Reading Village, what would be allowed by right there, instead of 22 units, is 1. Anybody would have to come back to CPDC and say, well, we wanna build more. So what is allowed in the entire residential district, S15, the other S's, is 1 house, 1 unit per lot.
Or
Did I get that
compliant
right?
lot.
Right, and that's different from another, equally important in another form, discussion about our actual housing inventory. What we're talking about is capacity.
Which we do have some data for, so just want to clarify that.
Robert Gore, 199 Summer. So in this instance here, if this was to pass and that fell then into this 22 unit group, would that then be credited for at least 22 units?
Exactly. So under our proposal of 22 units per acre, this lot is about 1 acre in size. It's just over it. So it would count as a 22 unit capacity on that lot.
But it's important, it's also important to know that that building could not be built under the zoning proposal that we're talking about tonight. You could only build a 22, maybe a 22 unit structure, probably even smaller
Smaller, it would have
because of the
setbacks
setbacks and
and- yeah.
everything. And that's a bit, right, that's important to understand, right? It's not like.
That, I understand
Yeah.
that, but then does 40B stuff then go away?
So 40B is a different discussion around our subsidized housing inventory
know.
of
Yeah.
10%.
I know, so
No, it
that's
doesn't.
why I'm saying, so
It does not go
does
away.
that change that?
No.
No, so it's a kind of a moot point.
40B is just a different.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, it's.
yeah, and
it's-
again, the 40B has to do with our housing inventory.
I know.
So the zoning capacity is different from the housing inventory for the purpose of this zoning requirement.
You have 10%, you're above 10%.
Right, and we'll get to affordability of our district.
I have one kind of important question to ask on that 40B. So let's say, as the map stands now, you said, okay, there's a 35-foot height limit, which pretty much limits to a 3-story building. But if 40B comes in, 40B is still a state law, so doesn't it override, if a developer comes in and says, hey, I'm gonna build 40B housing in this neighborhood that you're zoning for MBTA zoning, can they build a 5-story, 6-story building on the same lot, and does that, I mean, are we-
40B could still if we had a
okay, so,
letter of eligibility, but
But
there
they
is
can do
still,
that anywhere.
I know,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
the thing is,
and
they,
there's
they couldn't do it before because we would zone single-family residential, right?
Yes,
Like,
yes,
Yeah,
they
you
could,
could
yes,
have
they
this
could.
was a 40B in single family.
That was a commercial building though.
No,
But it
but
was
it's-
still zoned, yeah, so, yeah, that's sort of irrelevant, I
So
mean,
you're
that's,
saying somebody could buy, if somebody sold a house in our neighborhood.
Yep.
Yes.
Any developer could have come in and said, I'm doing 40B and thrown in a huge giant building, there's no controls on that? I mean,
Correct.
That's correct. And
So I don't want to.
I don't wanna
Yeah, yeah.
devolve into that, but if a developer can come in and propose a 40B house, a 40B development anywhere in town if our affordable housing inventory is below 10%. And that is a truism anytime our affordable housing is below 10%. This zoning requirement is different and not related to that, to that
and
law.
now, so we have to allow like that would happen. But do we have we have an excess of 40B right now, right? I mean, like not 40B, but we have an
So-
excess of affordable
Without
housing?
detracting too much into this realm, but the town of Reading right now is at 9.75% on your
Oh, so we weren't
SHI.
there yet.
There are a few pre-approved units that we're trying to get back onto the SHI. They just require a building permit to be issued, and we're trying to get the developer to get the building permit because they've been an approved project. And so we're working towards that, but
So 10% of this housing that they're building will eventually be developed in our neighborhood has to also be affordable housing.
no, we'll get to affordability requirements that we'll propose. May I move forward? If that's okay. Yep.
I have a question. What are the ramifications if we don't, Kim Hubbard, 43 Washington Street in Reading, if we don't comply with the law, what are the ramifications
I
for
think
the town?
we're gonna get to that question. Yeah, if he can proceed, and then hopefully by the end of his presentation, your
Yeah.
question will be answered.
So to march forward, the new zoning district that we're proposing is built off the concept of lower density housing, lower density multifamily housing over a larger area. We propose smaller scale multifamily housing in a new district made up of combining our existing A40 parcels with a majority of S15. In our new district is a majority of S15 being amended. But our focus is to propose uses that fall somewhere on this left end of the range. So you have your single family home over here, which will still be allowed, and you have duplexes, triplexes, quads, some of which already exist in Reading. There's a good existing stock of housing. And a lot of people would say that these areas add to the character of Reading, and what we're proposing in our concept is to reopen those things because these things can't be built again today. So we're trying to propose smaller density uses, trips, quads, twos, ones, upwards of ranging on lot size based on our unit capacity, density maximum, but we'll get into that further. But this is the general form of housing that we're looking to promote around our downtown to support the downtown in a walkable area. So we've proposed to name the new district mixed residential because it acknowledges the reality that our district does contain a mix of uses, and the continuation of that mix is what would be proposed. So currently in our district, we have 72% single family housing. That's right. Pretty obvious, but duplexes are 20% of our housing stock in the district, 4% of our multifamily ranging from your 3-unit building upwards to that Reading Village proposal of 68 units, but a majority are about 3 to 4, potentially up to 8 units existing. And 2% 2 and 4% are municipal land, and your land like your churches, your commercial businesses that fall within the district. So, but there is a range of existing housing stock. We're just proposing our zoning to reallow for that and reopen that. So to encourage of the variety of housing types that the community may wish to see. So our proposed zoning map here on the screen is this light blue here, and we'll zoom in a second, but the light blue is our new proposed mixed residential district. It's about 362 acres being proposed to rezone, we'll get into the specifics, out of 6,400 acres across the town. We're proposing to rezone just less than 6% of total land in Reading, and the percentages work out that, if you remember, I said existing multifamily zone is 1%, that's increasing by about 5% up to that 5.7, and single family zoning district will be reduced from 94% to 89%. But that's still 89% of the land zoned in the current S15 and S20 standards. So we'll jump into a bit more of the specifics here on our proposed district. So again, you I mentioned it's about 360 acres, but that's totality wise, including right of ways, municipal land, and other. When we start to jump into some of the underlying areas, we can tell that once we start subtracting municipal land, which is exempt from the law, we subtracted churches because they're not likely to be developed under this proposal. We subtracted right-of-way areas and we subtracted wetland areas, which
Sorry, Andrew,
gives us a.
how was that Brad Rhodes, 94 Eagle Street? Does the state law count all that, or are you kind of extrapolating away from the requirement there?
So just to try to continue on and answer that going onward, our current proposal of developable area is 255 acres, just around 255 acres. You may remember that the state said we had a minimum of 43 acres that we had to rezone for, or have a compliance zone of at least 43 acres. Based on the concept that we're proposing of the gentler density, the softer density, we do have to do more area than that 43 acres, but we are in excess of our requirements of acreage and our unit capacity. So the unit capacity of this zone ranges of around 4,000, maybe up to 5,000, but we'll get into that in a second again, because there's a lot of detail there.
So your proposal
Can you, he needs to put, I'm sorry, but he needs to create all the caveats, right? The answer is not that we have a proposal for 5,000 units.
Right.
I don't want that to hang out there.
Exactly.
Because that's not a proposal.
I also would just like
It
to
is a
say.
proposal.
No,
It's a
So,
capacity proposal.
so let's jump into some of the,
I think he got an answer to his question.
no, he's not going to right now. He's,
We're gonna-
Andrew's gonna
I
continue.
believe I answered your question
turn
by
will
saying
come.
we're in excess of the state requirements.
That wasn't my question. My question was the difference between the actual area, 362, and your notion of developable. Does the state care about developable, or
They
does it care
do,
about?
that's their definition of developable land. Municipal land is exempt, right of way is exempt. And that kind of comes back to how we get to the 22 units per acre, because that land is exempt. It does put a bit more onto the developable land, and then that also helps us.
So the real area we care about for compliance is 255, something like that, right?
I'm not gonna say that. The developable land in our proposed district is 255 acres.
And I think the rest of his presentation will start to get at some of these questions, and then after the
Would you
presentation.
prefer us hold the questions till after the whole presentation?
I believe that was the ask,
I
but we're
think-
trying to be
Yeah.
intuitive here.
I think we're concerned that we're not gonna have enough time at the end of
Yeah,
this. to
there's
visit
just a lot of
it, so-
context to this, and until you have the whole picture, it's probably best to hold your questions if we
Yeah,
can.
also, just a reminder that this is a hybrid hearing on Zoom, so when we have questions, we would love Andrew to finish, so then you can come to the podium and ask your questions, so everyone on Zoom can also hear them, please.
So just a bit of background on how we got to this map proposal. It's a result on the survey results as well as our public engagement to date, where a lot of the feedback was to focus the district on walking distance to amenities, commercial, train depot, schools, libraries, all the amenities that a lot of people care about. We also took into account that we got a lot of feedback to include both sides of a street, so that a neighborhood feels more consistent when any potential future development could occur. We also took into fact the current built environments of the street, and by that we mean that we really focused the zone around housing forms that are substantially similar to what we're proposing today. We did not really include areas that include your capes or split levels, because despite single family zoning allowing higher allowances, we didn't want to detract too much from those areas right off the bat. So a lot of the areas and neighborhoods in our boundary include about two and a half story to 3-story structures that exist, so that our forms proposed substantially match what exists in those neighborhoods today. We also heard from residents advocating for a larger map or smaller maps. So we've heard a variety of housing views. Again, just want to make that clear. So our current proposal for the district revolves around dimensional controls to try to allow for these forms. So the first two that you'll see here on the column on the right, we compared to the current S15 standards, because that's what most people are familiar with. The minimum lot size proposed is 5,000 square feet, and the minimum frontage proposed is 60 linear feet. And so that again is in essence to get a vast majority of our lots into compliance status and by right status. So that's where that number comes from. And then we've proposed to slightly alter the setbacks, reducing front yard requirements from 20 to 10, side yard from 15 to 10, and rear yard from 20 to 15. Slightly increasing maximum lot coverage from 25% to 30%, and height stays the same at 35 feet as allowed under single family zoning today. So parking is being slightly reduced. Multifamily exists at 1.5 spaces per unit. We have proposed 1.25 spaces per unit. All of these district dimensional controls help us achieve the minimum density required by the state of 15 units per acre across the district. The new metric to the zone is that 22 units per acre on a lot that I had mentioned previously.
We're gonna hold the questions.
Okay.
Just
So
so everyone gets a chance.
we just wanted to provide some local examples of what these could look like, because a lot of it does somewhat exist today. So on the left, you have, this is located on Green Street. It's a 12,500 square foot lot at about 27% lot coverage. This is 3 units. I believe the units average about 1,200 square foot on the interior. 4 units, yes, sorry. On the right here is a redevelopment ongoing on Village Street, and it's currently in its construction phase. It's about an 8,000 square foot lot with 25% lot coverage. So we just wanted to kind of show examples of how lot coverage works today, and that it starts to restrict the built environment to allow for the open space and the parking and the yard space that we've heard are desirable. We wanted to provide a local example of setbacks that vary greatly in this existing zone. So this is the neighborhood of Temple Street, which is right adjacent to the Parker Middle School up here. We tried to capture what are the front setbacks because that was our biggest reduction in proposal. And you can see out of the nearly 20 lots here, there is a great variety of front yard setbacks. A number of which are less than 10 feet, a number range from 10 to 15 feet, some 15 to 20, and fewer 20 plus feet on the front setback. So I don't know how familiar you are with this neighborhood, but I would encourage walking it so that you can start to see what the front setbacks of 10 feet could look in the built environment, because they do exist today. So onto the 22 units per acre maximum that we'd be looking to allow. So this is a metric again to help our minimum proposed square footage of 5,000 square feet achieve the unit count of 3 when you round up. I think it comes to 2.6, but rounding up you get to your 3 units defined as multifamily. So that helps the state tool count our minimum proposed lots as by right uses. I would ask you to keep this in context with the dimensional controls we just went over and the parking requirements, because again, even if unit capacity could allow up to 3 lots, it doesn't mean it's a practical build in the built environment on a 5,000 square foot lot when you add in the other dimensional controls on top of it. To explain a bit further, a vast majority of our lots, about 85% of our lots are 15,000 square feet and under. About 60% of the lots range from 5 to 10,000 square feet. So for the majority of the district, we're looking at a range of 1 to 8 units on a lot, typically 1 to 4 or 5. There are larger lots in the district, a number of which are the churches or built out denser multifamily housing that are somewhat denser than even our current proposal would allow for. Making sure I just didn't miss anything here. Oh yes, importantly again, the 22 units per acre on a lot is the minimum. We've tested a variety of options, and this was the minimum density we could allow on a lot. 1, to get the 5,000 square feet up to 3 units, and 2, to get the district-wide density of 15 units per acre. So a lot might allow up to 22 units per acre, but our district currently is like 15.3 units per acre, between 15 and 16. So we're just at the threshold of compliance, which is why our dimensional controls are very important, because the higher we start to push those up, we can fall right out of compliance with the density. So just wanted to help provide that context. Continuing onwards, we wanted to provide a reasonable rate of redevelopment expected, because people hear the unit capacity number and jump right to it. We've analyzed the town's permitting data from 2000 to the present at the rate of single-family lots being redeveloped over time. And we also looked at our 40R zoning district rate of redevelopment, which is our predominant multifamily housing zone, though again, it's denser than what we would allow in our proposal. Over the rate of single-family district redevelopment, we've seen 2% of parcels redeveloped over a 10-year period, every 10-year period of time. That's about an average of 13 parcels per year being redeveloped in the single-family zoning district. Again, 2% of the lots. So when we move forward to try to apply that to our zoning district to provide an actual build-out number over the decade that we might expect, we look at our district over 10 years. We know we have 981 parcels. That's being generous because a number are not buildable, but we'll take the total parcels, 981 parcels. If we apply the rate of redevelopment seen in the single family district, because this is a predominant existing single family zone, we look at 19 parcels being redeveloped over the course of a decade, and we took that and multiplied it by our median lot size, which would of 9,000 square feet, which would allow for 5 units. And we feel that that's a high number based for any redevelopment to expect, but on the course of the average, we wanted to err on the side of caution. So we used the median of 5 because it was a number to understand. And when we look at 19 parcels being redeveloped over a decade under the single family average, we see just under 100 units built over a decade. If we got closer to our 40R redevelopment rate and said, you know, interest rates go down, we start to see more development. Let's look at a 5% redevelopment rate in our district. Across 981 parcels, that's just under 50 parcels in a decade being redeveloped, and just under 250 units over the course of a decade. If we go to an extreme scenario, which is a 10% rate of redevelopment, which I would say is unprecedented for this type of development, you'd be looking at just under 100 parcels and 500 units. So over the course of a decade, you look between 100 units to 500 units in this zone. Reading's historical pace of housing development since 1960 is 600 units a year. So this
A decade.
Yes, a decade. Yep. Sorry if I misspoke there. So we feel that this proposal keeps us substantially in line with the historic growth of Reading and not over-exasperate the rate of redevelopment that we would expect. So that's when we start to say the unit capacity is really like a far off number over the course of a long period of time, and that what we can expect based on local data and history is similar to the averages. We're almost done here, I promise. I think this is one of the last slides. So our zoning bylaw is structured by topic for those who don't delve into it every single day like I do, which is why the notice requirement that Heather read out listed a whole variety of different sections that we are proposing to amend. So there are 3 types of changes holistically being made to the bylaw. We'd like to update the definitions and terms for consistency to comply with the law. We would like to remove the existing A40 language and reframe it to that mixed residential title. And we'd like to introduce the new concepts of that maximum density allowances and the affordable housing component of our district. So that ranges from section 2, 3, 5, 6, and 9, with a new section for the inclusionary housing being proposed. We probably did not include this slide, and I don't know why, so let me see if we have it on the affordability language. Jump here. So in our section, just to quickly elaborate, for our projects that based on the density allowances, we could now include inclusionary zoning to help keep the town on pace for its 10% SHI requirement. We're proposing that any project of 10 units or more require 10% affordability requirements to keep us on that 1 in 10 rate. So that is in essence what we can do under the law as well by right, is a 10% at 80% AMI, which is lesser than our 40R district, but consistent with many inclusionary zoning bylaws across the state. So we do have affordability components. They're just projects for 10 units or more, and we'll delve a bit more into it in the zoning bylaw itself, but I just wanted to make that point because it is important, and it was a great need of the community that we heard during our public engagement process. So when we had converted to the density, we included this because we know it's an important element. So just to make sure everybody is aware too, we have been to many different boards and committees that have many different services. We have talked to a variety of town departments, and we are keeping those discussions ongoing. We're working with the Department of Public Works to ensure that the infrastructure is there. We're all extremely certain that the infrastructure that exists today is adequate for the short-term growth that we might expect. But I would note that sewer, we just, as always in any type of development, you keep an eye on sewer because that's really what's impacted by the built environment. So, but today we have adequate service that we know could handle the capacity that we're looking at. We're also looking for future pedestrian improvements with them, streetscape, pedestrian, bike infrastructure, transit-oriented, try to keep people focused on the transit-oriented development of this style of housing. We're working with the police department to better understand parking regulations and enforcement, make sure we're not adding an undue level of service to them. We're working with the fire department on the design of lots to make sure that they have the access that they're required to, or if they have other parameters around multifamily housing, sprinkler systems, etc. We're working with the school committee on future potential enrollment projections so that we can better understand. Again, when we look at our rate of redevelopment that we expect on this, it's not substantially different than previous decades. So we just want to give them a minimum level of confidence that we're not going to over-exasperate their system either. Historical district and commissions, we've had ongoing discussions with them as well to potentially improve their regulations on historic properties and what's allowed and what's not, and the assessment of historic properties to make sure our local inventory captures all of the structures that we hope that it captures. That's an ongoing conversation. We're working with them. We're meeting with them Wednesday night to continue that conversation, but that is another important element as well. And we're of course working with Cpdc on the administration of this because they do trigger site plan review, and we want to make sure that we're adequately capturing any multifamily housing proposal to ensure that the stormwater components, the parking, the yard space, all of the areas that we've touched on are being adequately provided in any development. So that was brief. There's a lot of info in there.
Two things, or one thing, if you can hit on, right? The question came up about, you know, what happens if we don't.
Yep. So if we don't comply, the question is what happens if we don't comply with the state law. So we would not be eligible for the grants that we have continuously been seeking over the past few years. We wouldn't be eligible for the $2 million MassWorks grant we had just received, housing choice grants that have pushed a number of projects forward, potentially other grant resources as well. And we would also likely face litigation from the state or public housing groups. So there's already been a few communities stating that they would seek non-compliance, and they have already had litigation filed. And so,
Can I expand upon that question? My name is Chris DiMattei. I live at 172 High Street in Reading. What happens if your proposed zoning changes fail to pass at town meeting in April?
we would try again in November.
And what happens if it fails in November? I mean, eventually, we will be deemed non-compliant, correct?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Is it question time?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I want to set the stage here about sort of how we got to the proposal that we got to, right? It wasn't just, you know, Andrew and Mary and coming up with that. You know, they did a lot of work over the course of the summer, reaching out to the community. Mary has lots of good statistics on how many, you know, on what that developed, how that proceeded, and we got a lot of input from town residents on what they were looking for, what they weren't looking for, and this reflects that input that was gathered over the course of the summer. Our goal here is not to go to town meeting with something that's not going to go through. Our goal here is to listen to the input that we already heard, listen to the input that I'm sure that you'll provide tonight, come up with a zoning, a proposal to bring to town meeting. It's town meeting's decision on whether they move forward or that. But I would hope that comments that are given, right, because we're gonna come up with a proposal to give to town meeting. And I want that proposal to be the best one that reflects, you know, the will of the town. So I'm gonna challenge people to give comments that aren't just, I don't like this, but what should we do? How should we change this proposal to reflect what you would like to see? And the answer isn't have it all go away, because that's not what, I mean, we have to give something to town meeting for them to vote on, so. Mary?
I did wanna just add in terms of consequences, so the end of this year is the first deadline for any communities to comply. So there's 12 communities that have to comply by the end of 2023. If there are any that do not comply at that time, we will gain additional information about what happens when you don't comply, right? There have been some rumors that we've heard from people who've been working in communities that have a deadline at the end of this year, that they have heard from the state that if a town does not pass a zoning proposal itself, the state will then come in and give you a district instead. I cannot confirm or deny if that is true. I'm just saying, as the situation develops over the next year, we will learn more information about what happens if you don't
Can you
comply.
expand upon that? What 12 communities and why only 12? There's 177 that are
Sure.
MBTA communities in the list.
Sure, so under the law, every community was divided based on the type of MBTA service that they receive. So then they were then split into 3 deadlines. The first deadline is rapid transit communities, people who have the T, people who have really good bus service. We're in the commuter rail community, that's the biggest chunk, right? So there's about 75 communities, I think, whose deadline is the end of 2024. And then adjacent communities, which is people who are next to people with a commuter rail station, their deadline is 2025.
Right, but the rapid transit communities are they're all mostly high-density communities, because that's where rapid transit is, right? So they're gonna have completely different situation than those in the perimeter in the commuter rail belt, if you will.
Every town has totally unique requirements that are set based on the existing land usage, based on developable area, based on existing housing units, based on population. So each one of those have their own requirements, just like we have completely different requirements from our neighbors here.
And I don't think, to my knowledge, any of them had existing zoning that did comply
No, I
with the
don't
law.
think they did.
Yeah, I mean, that's obvious because the zone was just created by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or the need for the zone was just created. So sure, they're not gonna have that, but they might have the ability to do similar things to what you described with that project across from the commuter, from the station, where that could potentially be rezoned and then be part of the compliance model, even though it's an existing building with existing units, right? So they may have more opportunities to do that than say we do, because we're largely a single-family residential.
Yeah, in
town.
theory, they might have more existing multifamily units than Reading may.
Andrew, can I have you sit down? I'd like to have people who have questions come up to the podium. I'm having comments from people on Zoom that they're having trouble hearing the questions, so I just wanna make sure that, if you, we'll start with you, you had your hand up first, in the green shirt in the back, if you wanna come to the podium. We'll have you, introduce yourself and where you live and ask your question, thank you.
I live on Old Farm Road. My name is Joan Frask. I think why I'm here is because I see so much development in Reading over the past several years. But now I'm learning that none of that will apply to this.
So none of our existing zoning districts comply, not in downtown, not A40, not A80.
I don't understand that. You know, it seems to me that you're the planning committee, so you all know why the development that has occurred. But as a resident, that has changed my view of this town. Now to see another regulation of multifamily or 5 families, it just seems to me that the the fabric of Reading has changed and is gonna continue to change. So I guess that's what I'm looking to find out. And it's all, it's all gonna be mandated by the state or the town. And not really,
So-
in, exactly. The
So-
residents won't have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I think really part of the reason why our existing zoning districts don't comply is that, right, they're not by right, right? A developer can't just come in and say, this is what we want to build. And the state put on certain limitations on what towns can require. Now, the town of Reading, we've worked really hard in making sure that we get a lot out of the developers that develop in town. So
Such as what?
we get affordable housing, we get the
Revenue?
Growth revenue,
yeah,
commercial
what else didn't they
space.
allow? They didn't allow, our efficiency,
Oh, to keep
Right,
up with
like
like the
density.
green.
Right.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So there's
Well,
a
I
number
just
of those
don't- I
things
just
that
see that
if we took those zones, like the state wouldn't allow us to sort of negotiate that level because they think that other towns can't negotiate as well as we can, right?
Well, I think you
And
ought to
so
be able to negotiate with the
that-
state. I think
Okay.
that's what your board should do.
So I just want to clarify too, there are multiple paths that Reading could seek compliance. You could revisit your downtown zoning district and allow mid-rise mixed-use development to a degree. We've just heard through our process that that's not the desirable type of multifamily housing that the community wants, so that's how we focus on the smaller scale.
It should count toward it.
The existing developments, again, don't count, it's what the zoning allows for, and our zoning.
And again, the zoning of those buildings, it should be changed.
To meet the requirements.
I think it should be fought with the state.
Again, that's the difference between what was built, and if any of those brand new buildings were to fall down and somebody were to come request to build another one, what was to be, they wouldn't be allowed to build that without coming to CPDC. And so what the town's solution must meet is multifamily housing. And we're aiming for smaller multifamily housing in a zone that meets all the requirements. We've been clarifying questions.
Yes, yeah, so really, we do want to, focus on clarifying questions that get at getting a better understanding of what's being proposed, not questions of I like it or I don't like it. Because that will be debated at town meeting, right? And there's a time for that. We have limited time here. We want to get to the best proposal that we can.
Robert Corwin, 199 Summer Ave. You referred a number of times to surveys and interaction with the town folks. What percentage of that was anonymous?
I don't have the numbers of the survey being anonymous. I think most of them included a name.
So do you know where the input is coming from? Like what percentage of the input is coming from this district versus the proposed district versus the northern half of the town?
Within our survey, I don't believe we asked if they were Reading residents to confirm that. I do not believe we asked people's exact addresses. We did ask people to enter an email to ensure unique responses to the extent possible, because we did notice occasionally, we want unique responses to the survey, to your point. Within that, once we've started kind of our public engagement events, I would say a large number of people who've been at our events have been within the district that is within the map being proposed. I'd have to do a little more research to give you firm numbers, though. I will be honest. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
And just in another side, the majority of this, I guess, proposal, has it been designed by the two of you, or has who's the architect of this?
I would describe ourselves as the kind of interpreters of the information we've received from the public. So we started with a survey. We weren't confident about what direction the public would wanna go in, so as Andrew indicated, when we started off this process, there's a number of ways that Reading could choose to comply, right? One option would be to say, let's build a bunch more or zone to allow more like larger mid-rise buildings in downtown, right? That's one possible way that we could have complied. So we started to kind of generally ask, if we do have to put multifamily housing in Reading, what type of housing is the least offensive to people, right? Kind of what kind of parameters and roughly where do people think that if we were to put more multifamily housing, it would see the most benefit for the community? So we started with that, we interpreted that from our survey and then took it forward into a series of 3 public events, public comment we've received. We did a workshop, we presented preliminary proposals and kind of worked through what we were thinking and received feedback in an iterative process. And these hearings are kind of the next phase of that iterative process.
Okay. But not knowing where a lot of this input is coming from, like it could have been coming from predominantly outside of the district. Correct?
That is true,
Well,
however.
It's important that at the beginning of the process, there was no preconceived notion on what was gonna come out of it, right? And so it was town, right? The approach there was town-wide. No one was focusing on this area because that map didn't exist. You know, no one knew what that area was.
Right, no, I understand that,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, to get to this point, you're relying on information. And I'm just curious,
I'm happy to follow
about
up
the
with
quality
you.
of that information.
Happy to follow up with you with more details.
I mean, I'm outside of this district, so it's not like it's directly impacting me per se, but it does impact me because it impacts everybody.
So that's the point of getting feedback from everyone, right? To help direct us and guide us to what the town at large would like to see.
And that's part of tonight and the next 2 hearings as well.
Right. And to be clear, you guys work for the town, right? Both of you. Do you live in the town?
Yeah.
No, okay. All right, thanks.
Andrew, I'd like to point out that you did have a precinct 2 meeting last week at the library, where they sent out notifications to people in precinct 2 about the meeting that was specifically requested. So yes, the people in the district have had plenty of opportunity and have had outreach for them to.
Just to expand on that for 1 second, we're planning to conduct more specific precinct meetings in January. We had scheduled precinct 2 early based on a number of emails that we had received, but we're planning more specific precinct and town meeting outreach. But we've included town meeting members on every step of the way, lots of email blasts, lots of inclusion. But we will hold those more specific meetings.
The gentleman in the blue shirt there, yeah.
We do have a number of hands.
You gotta jump up quickly. Hi, my name's Tom White. I live on 46 Grand Street. I've been here 27 years. I like to think of myself as being reasonably informed. Now, I don't get the daily newspaper. I generally don't check the town website unless I'm looking at the compost, whatever. I vaguely recall some survey, I think last summer. But in my mind, it wasn't related to this massive rezoning, most massive rezoning I think I've read in Massachusetts in over 100 years. So the import of what the survey was, I don't think was properly conveyed, okay? I think I read some of the outreach was, some of you folks went to a town fair and handed out pamphlets, okay? I personally don't feel, especially I'm in the zone here, that I really received accurate information, but be that as it may, when I get a letter from the town that says, you, the property owner that's been here for 26 years, as a courtesy to you, we're gonna let you know that we're rezoning your property. Highly offensive, okay? Now, let me end by saying, I'm in support of multifamily housing. Now, I have 3 young kids that I raised here in Reading, and I wanna see them be able to buy a house and be affordable. And it's important, I absolutely agree with that. If the town is going to comply, which we probably end up doing, I just think that this density, even though you did a really nice job explaining it in terms of what you're trying to, I understood what you're trying to say, which is we gotta give the state these numbers, but in effect, maybe some people won't wanna develop in those areas, okay, whatever, take that off the record, but it's cramming everybody into the downtown zone here. It's everybody, historic districts. We've got 4 exits off major highways here. There's bus lines all along those highways. right? Up here at Coloruso's, over by REI, down by Home Depot, even over here, where the 93 exit is. So I would seriously ask this committee and also all of the town members and people that are watching on TV tonight, to seriously talk to your town committee representatives about how this is being jammed into one small area. Because only those people that are in this district are the ones that are gonna be affected. Really, nobody else outside that district's being affected. And I think it's only fair that the burden of this multifamily housing be spread around the town. It's like Newton is doing villages, I think. They're splitting up their districts, right? You have to have 40% within half mile of MBK train station. But there's plenty of other places in here. And I don't want to hear how people have to walk to the train station. You can get a bus, you can get on a bicycle, you can walk. It's no problem. I did that most of my life. Most of my life, I didn't have a nice house in Reading, you know? Fortunate to have that nice house. I just think it should be balanced and fair. And I thank you for your respect and time. I appreciate that. Thank
So,
Yeah, one, and then we're gonna go to Zoom. I know we have a bunch of hands up there.
Virginia Blodgett, 99 Prescott. I have to admit that when I first heard about it, and I heard about it with the survey, we did the survey, I went to the meeting at the library, and at that point was the first that I'd really heard details. And my first reaction when it said, 43 acres, and then the two proposals were like 300 and 500 acres, I was horrified by the size. Andrew explained the fact that the only way we can do 43 acres is giant buildings. If we want smaller buildings, we need to spread it out. The problem with this map is it's not spread out. This is 5.7% of the town's land. So 95% of the town is not affected by this. And I really feel, it's human nature being what it is, when this goes to town meeting, it's going to pass. Because the people who live in that 94% are going to say, gee, that's really too bad. I wish they'd done it differently. But it's not me, so I'm fine with it. I know it's going to change the way the downtown looks. Well, that's what we have to do, because I know that you guys are hemmed in by this. You didn't ask for this. The state said this is it. I wanted to mention two things. The zoning bylaw on the first page says the purpose of the zoning bylaw. In that list, provide adequate light and air, to prevent overcrowding of land, and to avoid undue concentration of population. That's what this is doing. We are not sharing with the rest of the town. It's going to have less impact on everybody if the buildings are more scattered throughout town. So I went from saying, oh my gosh, 500 acres, to saying too small. So that's my only thought.
I just want to be clear, wherever we propose in or out of the half mile does require a zoning amendment that would be similar, if these are the forms desired in those areas, similar to what we're proposing, and we'll have those same conversations if that tends to happen with those neighbors of that zoning, if that somehow comes to light.
Right, so just if I understand that comment correctly, right? This is about the smallest scale of development that could be done, right, on at a parcel by parcel neighborhood basis. And the question there is, does it go in this map, or does part of this map, part of these neighborhoods, then part of this rezoning go up around, where
around schools, around
around schools or around
So that's a very strong claim. Can you prove your claim?
So I think he asked a question if this is the minimum.
Yes.
You claim that this is about the minimum it can be.
Could you come up here if you're going to speak?
I said my name already, but.
No, but people, are there people on Zoom, other people in the community that want to hear what's going on?
Simple question you can repeat, but yes, I'd like you to justify your claim, please.
So we've tested a number of different shape files, and there have been areas where we've gotten between 150 and 200 acres of developable land for the density. we took that and then said, okay, what's a holistic, healthy zone that is equitably distributed? Put them up and around 3 blocks on all sides of downtown so that we're not condensing the development or the zone in one specific quadrant, if you will, if you consider it in quadrants. So that's, and then on top of the public feedback we got of the including both sides of the street, that cut, because we had narrowed it down, then brought it back up for both sides of the streets, and that's how we got here today. So it's probably in slightly excess of the acres truly needed for compliance, but we took it as why don't we focus on the broader housing goals and compliance with that, and what is a healthy zoning district.
Quick question on, relating to that. Is there any requirement for the district to be contiguous?
There is minimum contiguous requirements, there's minimum size requirements of 5 acres.
For a zone?
For any zone, it has to be.
Because there can be subzones.
There can be subzones or
Correct.
other zones, not.
Because there's actually a lot of flexibility in the state's proposal.
Yep.
I'm sorry, we really need, if you're gonna speak, we really need you to come up to the podium, because there are a lot of people on Zoom and they can't hear you when you're speaking from your
So
seat.
would it be correct to say the current map with the is like 3 times as large as the minimum map required for compliance? No? Like what is the
So again, the minimum we've tested under our
yes,
parameters
150
to
is
200 acres, yeah, of developable
you
land.
wrote to me in an email 100 to 150, 200 accounting for
It
neighborhoods.
depends on the district geography, because every lot is different and it gets really into the weeds of different neighborhoods and areas, so it depends.
I have a simple request. Would it be possible for you to share the Excel spreadsheet where you came up with the different compliance metrics? Because I would really like to understand the metrics and I would like to play with it, because I think it's not in the shapes. So I think this is the document you're going to send to the state. Can you make it available to people so they understand better the constraints you're working
Can I
with?
just say that the spreadsheet that the Commonwealth uses
Can
as a
I,
compliance
I just asked not to speak from your seat. I really,
No,
I'm
the
gonna,
spreadsheet's
I'm
available.
gonna
I would
enforce
like
that.
to see the shapes on the spreadsheet that correspond to the proposed map. Could you please do that, make it available to the public? It's okay if it's work in progress, like the way you were showing us work in
I
progress.
think that Andrew is hesitant because it's not as my understanding is it's not a
I do
simple
have the
spreadsheet.
spreadsheet, I have the tools to
Yeah.
get the shapes, but I just would like to know, to see the result and the metrics. Like, I want to understand the compliance metrics, we need, it's about compliance, it's about transparency, so let's
Right.
just understand.
It's all out there and
Yes.
it's just, we can share the spreadsheet.
Wonderful, can you please do that? I also want to say one more thing, I've talked to many people, my neighbors, I've been involved before in 40B and so on, but I want to say, lots of people came and told me, we want to understand if that's the only map. And it's not the smallest map. So I know you got lots of emails which said, show us a smaller map so we understand the trade-offs. So I just want to repeat that many people have talked to me. I think many other people here in the room want to see not this holistic map, but the compliant map which meets state requirement and separates compliance from vision. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we would like to kind of at large address comments about the map. We would like to say we are absolutely open to revising the map, but we would like to do it through the same process that we created this map, which is that if you have suggestions for which areas you feel are unsuitable and you'd like to be excluded, you can take a map, draw on them, X them out. You can take a map of the town and submit the circled areas that you think are better for inclusion than what we have presented. We are very open and willing to continue to revise it, but we would like to do it with specific direction from residents as to which areas are most suitable, right? We've been collecting maps.
I just said that.
Sure.
Why do you need me to draw a map for you? I just said in front of the whole town that you have multiple highway exits and bus stops that are walkable and have nice communities and neighborhoods that things could be spread around. should look at towns like Newton, some other towns that are considering these little villages and little sections across their town.
Sure.
That's more helpful.
I would just say in response specifically to the request for a smaller map, right? We understand that people believe there should be a minimum map. We're happy to create one if you can advise us which areas of this map are unsuitable. We also would like to mention that there are people in every section of this map who have reached out to us who are excited about the prospect of being able to build additional units on their property, which is why we are hesitant to say which areas should be excluded. That's the extent to which I'm gonna talk about the map. We do have some people on Zoom that we would like to get to. We're gonna ask them to unmute. Let me ask her to.
Don't go anywhere, you'll be next, but.
Oh, can I defer to Rhonda? Can Rhonda go first?
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
So my name is Rhonda Holt. I live at 46 Fairview Ave. And I've spent an awful lot of time this past week and a half notifying my neighbors, many neighbors, who knew nothing about this, nothing about it. Whatever outreach, and I know you did some outreach, there were the flyers, there were, I don't know, a DPW notice, whatever it was. It didn't reach most of us. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't reach anyone, but the first dozen people I spoke to had no clue what this was. They had no clue about it. So the communication going forward needs to be better. I mean, I get a notice from, a reverse 911 or whatever it is, notice about work being done at the end of my street. I don't get a notice about like, oh, by the way, we're turning your neighborhood into multifamily zoning. It's upsetting, right? So, and I gave you all a copy of what I sent out by email and everything, but I've spent, if I can get the word out in 3 days, surely you can step it up a little bit. So that's my one comment, okay? Now, about the zone. From what I read, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we need 1,500 units, a minimum of 43 acres. It doesn't have to be confined to 43 acres. It's a minimum of 43 acres. Why is it all, and only 40% has to be within a half mile of the zone, half mile of the train depot. So my first question is, why are they shoving 100% of this housing into this tiny little area? I mean, really, at a density of 22 units per acre. You're not even giving us a buffer zone. 3 stories. I'm the most liberal person on the planet, as anybody can tell you. I'm fine with if you said, you know what, we're gonna build one kind of like the pictures you were showing, like one kind of unit on one property, and it houses 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 homes. We have a lot of houses in our neighborhood even that are 2 families that people don't even know about, right? Or maybe they do, like there's quite a few on Echo, there's one at the end of Sunnyside, there's one on Fairview. Nobody minds, I shouldn't say nobody, I'll speak for myself. I don't mind that. To increase the housing, I don't mind if you increase the housing by a bit. What I do mind is the prospect of my neighbor's house being torn down, and I have a solid brick building, 3 stories high with as much housing, and the rest of the area is all paved around it for cars that you didn't allow enough room for cars. It's just, this is not acceptable in any way. I mean, it's shoving everything in such a small space. You don't know if you can get the sewer system to work. You don't know if you can get the storm drain system to work with this. I mean, unless you get a clearance, really, that says we can support 22 units per acre in this whole district from the DPW or the engineer, I don't see how you can go forward with this plan and just say, well, we'll cross our fingers and hope the streets don't flood when we pave over everything. Why can't we just bring all this? Was there ever another draft? I mean, you base this on the survey. I filled that survey out myself. I got maybe halfway through and said, can't fill this out because there's no context to the questions. Like the people who answered, yes, we'd like to see multifamily housing down, if you have to build multifamily or apartment buildings, we'd like to see it downtown and by the train station. Of course you do. that's where the apartment buildings are, and that's where the apartment buildings go. They didn't say, nobody suggested that you start building in one single-family neighborhoods. And I don't wanna spread it to other people's neighborhoods any more than I want in my own. It's not the neighborhood I bought into. I mean, it's not really, it's a bait and switch. I'm okay with the MBTA law, like if that's it, I understand we have to comply. We don't have to comply with 22 units per acre. I mean, it's just, I can't even wrap my head around that. And the redevelopment rate, like, I'm not sure what you're basing that on, because we've never had a situation where you've taken a whole section of town and said, hey, developers, come on in, build whatever you want. And as nice as like the pictures are that you're, you know, like, oh, we're hoping the housing will look like this. When a developer gets in there, they're gonna put in as many units as they possibly can. Like, it could be a neon green triple decker. You know, like, it's just, you need to, really, I'm urging you, please, spread some of this, you can spread 60% of that district down along Main Street, off the little sides there, it's contiguous. It spreads the kids to the different school systems, it relieves the burden on the sewer and storm drain system. I mean, that alone would solve a lot of problems. You're gonna be creating more problems, you're dividing the town, it's gonna be the city of Reading and the town of Reading. I mean, and that's something to keep in mind when the next override vote comes up, because the city of Reading's not gonna be too happy voting for the town of Reading's new, whatever, schools, storm drain systems, it's just, that's all I have to say. And I truly apologize for being so angry, but I am angry. I'm tired from passing out notices. I'm tired from answering 1 million emails this week. And I'm not happy about this plan. So my suggestion is spread the wealth a little bit through the rest of the town.
How about Aaron? Aaron's still there waiting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Want to jump to Zoom?
Yeah.
If I can, maybe for 1 second. My staff and I have put in a lot of hours for engagement. I know it's hard to reach out to everyone, but we've done DPW mailings that go townwide. We've done the tax bill that goes to every property. We've gone to a dozen boards and committee meetings. We've worked Sundays, we've worked Saturdays, we've worked late nights. So I'm gonna applaud my staff for the effort. We're a team of 2 and we can't be everywhere and anywhere at once. So I understand. We sent this letter based on the map that we were trying to propose, and we wanted to get the feedback from everybody in this district because we too recognize that we've heard from the town at large. Now we want more concise feedback based on the district to make sure. We are more than confident of our sewer and water capacity, and the proposed height is the exact same as single family heights proposed. So it's not about multi-family height versus single family height. 35 feet is allowed for a single family dwelling. They can come tear down any dwelling and build up to 35 feet right now. We've kept that the same because that's proven to work and be comfortable to many in the community. So the permit, and we can go on and on, but the permitting data is based on historical record here in town that, again, my administrative and permitting staff has done a great job of tracking and capturing for 25 plus years. So that's how we got to our proposal and the build out projection, which is, again, keeps us in line with the historical growth and pace of Reading's housing development, around 600 units every decade. So I understand there's a lot of angst, and I understand the comments that people may wish to see this expand beyond the half mile and not focus. We've proposed this because a lot of the comment we've gotten has been the opposite, to say focus it in the half mile, make it walkable, make it match the existing forms. So that's how we came to this proposal. So I understand the comments, I do want to say that, but there is a lot of underlying reasons of how we got here.
So right, I think part of the mindset is that a lot of the forms, right, as you mentioned, as I know Mr. Talbot mentioned, right, there are a lot of 2-family, 3-family houses, multifamily houses in the downtown. The form, and you showed those pictures, the form of those really wouldn't change, and that's what we're but right now, they're all, none of those, I'm gonna, wiggle here a little bit, Dave. For the most part, right, those buildings are not compliant with the base zoning, right? You can't build those by right, and because probably a lot of everyone's property is under 1,500 square feet. So the idea is, first, like, let's make that all compliant. Let's make the zone actually what's built in the region, and not try and create multifamily that is different in form than what's there. So it would be more units, but it's not, right, that was the attempt, is not to have it be drastically different in form than what's there. So
There are no
it-
hopes.
Yeah.
We think, we believe and are confident that our zoning allows for that types of forms and has the controls necessary to keep it consistent.
And I guess, right, as I'm hearing feedback, right, that it's sort of like what was that little toy you used to play with, these squeeze and like different things, right? We could narrow it down to 45 acres, but what that means is that somewhere, maybe not here, right, or maybe here, right, narrow it down to 45 acres, but that form, right, that's going to mean that the form needs to be a lot bigger, right? It's much bigger multifamily, 100 unit types of developments that would need to be approved by right. And that's what I think we heard pretty clear, that that's, no one in town wants that, right? And so that's why we got down to the trying to get down to the smaller scale to meet the existing form. Now, is that form, should it all be here? Should it be some here, some up by Home Goods? Should it be, as you suggested, down Main Street, the form of Main Street? I'm not sure that fits, but yeah, I mean, we heard a lot from Pinevale neighborhood, right? That's not that form either. So, right, that's the trick here, is figuring out, we do have options, right? And where those options go, I'm
Just tonight, we've heard go smaller or go bigger, and so
Yeah.
that's what we've been working in, of the variety of needs and comments, and we felt that this was a middle of the road proposal.
It's middle of the road for.
Mr. Chair, there's someone still
Are you able
online.
to speak?
Yes, Erin's been waiting.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes,
Yes.
this is
Sorry.
Joe and Erin Gismondo, 34 Sunnyside Avenue. I have a comment, I guess, first. There's a lot of import that's been put on this survey. And as someone who did take the survey myself this summer, the questions were answered with a total lack of any knowledge about the law or this whole process. And so I'm not sure, putting all that importance, my answers now would definitely be different now that I'm more educated about this. And so I'd be curious, if a survey were done again, if you would get some different answers. And so putting all the importance on that survey, I guess I'm questioning. And then my other, did you want to say something?
You can. I guess the other piece of information that I guess I question or would be interested in knowing more about, the Reading Village Reading Village example that you gave, and then kind of knowing how that developed, how the property was bought up, and then another parcel was bought, and then another parcel was bought to make this huge, enormous Met building. And I understand, that is not in compliance with anything. So my one comment about it would be, wouldn't it make sense to look at, and I understand it would have to be at least 5 acres, but look at what is currently in the downtown area to make sure that we're creating a zone that is counting all of those units. And I would like to know more information, I guess, about the post office building too, that we're accounting for those units. If they're, and I think the survey would help us, another survey with more educated residents would help us to talk about different zones. But when I looked at our own property, and we are right on the pink and blue line, we are in the divided Sunnyside Ave area. Our lot is 0.28 acres. So if somebody bought our lot, offered us some great sum, and also bought our neighbor's lot, which is 0.49 acres, and then the one right behind us, which is on the other blue pink line, that would be over an acre of land. So in our, we have a split, which you talked about, you didn't really want something about the splits, but we have a split. And so in these three little land pieces, there could be 23.76 units in the middle of a neighborhood and right next to this part that's staying single family dwelling. So it seems too much. And I still don't honestly really understand why. And, I listened to the whole presentation, but I just still quite don't get it, why it's not at 15 units per acre, why it had to be at 22. I still just don't really understand that part.
So I can try to tackle a number of those. Yep. So in terms of the downtown development or something like Reading Village 40B, and in terms of why they're non-compliant, I won't get into the specifics of how Reading 40 Village got developed. That was one parcel of decrepit vacant structure that was ripe for redevelopment. We'll go with that in short. But in terms of the 40R, again, it's not about what is existing and built. And also, every 40R development we've had has gotten a density waiver. What's allowed by right in 40R is 20 units per acre. And there's mixed use components that don't necessarily meet the state's requirements of mixed use under MBTA communities. So it comes back to that zoning district, and the 40R district now has a minimum lot size, higher parking rates, higher commercial rates. So there's many variety of reasons why that doesn't comply in terms of the density. And again, everything we've heard to date has been, we don't want to keep promoting the mid-rise higher dense development style. So that's why we've steered away from the downtown, because it feels like it's a own separate conversation of, if we want downtown development, what does that look like and what is desirable? In terms of, sorry, I forgot one of your other points.
She had a good question.
15, 22 units, yeah, so this district, everything you see in blue, totality wise, is just at about nearly over 15 units per acre. When the state runs it in its tool, right, again, there's about 360 acres in here that we would have to achieve 15 units an acre across, but the state subtracts your right-of-way, your municipal land, and potentially other uses as well, like protected lands, wetlands, and things like that. So that then automatically shrinks your acreage of developable area, which has to fit the density. So that's how we got to the 250 acres of developable land, despite having 360, because we have a lot of roads, we have a lot of municipal chunks in there, large municipal chunks. So that forces that kind of extra density onto the lots. And so that's how we got to the 22 units, because we tested 15 units an acre, we tested 20 units an acre, we tested 25, 30, 35. 22 units was the bare minimum we could get to get 15 units across the district when you start subtracting out all those other uses. It's also the minimum needed for our 5,000 square foot lot minimum, which gets the 90% plus of lots into compliant by right status at 3 units for the multifamily definition. So it kind of worked out nicely that way, that it got us the 3 units minimum and maximum on our smaller lots, and it got us the density required just barely. So that's where that number comes from. I hope that helps.
And Andrew, can I point out one last thing? The reason we avoided rezoning the downtown smart growth district and business A is because this is a residential requirement, and therefore, if we make it by right, that means you lose your businesses, and they're just putting up residences.
Right.
And I believe we did not want to lose any of our commercial businesses or the potential for commercial.
That is correct. That comes back to just 5% of Reading is zoned for commercial, and we wanted to keep that integrity intact. And this law and compliance with it doesn't meet those district probably desires.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vanessa Alvarado, Mount Vernon Street. First, Andrew and Mary, I attended your presentation in November and it was great. I cannot imagine how difficult this is with all the formulas and spreadsheets you have to do. So I just want to express my gratitude. I have a question for those in the audience. So I, full disclosure, live in the blue map. No matter how it is drawn, I am 100% going to be in the blue map. I am curious how many people in the room are in the blue area? Okay, so the meeting I attended in November, there was two different versions of this map. Both of them were larger than what we're seeing here today. The overwhelming response from my neighbors and many people that I know was that they were appalled at how big the maps were and they wanted them smaller. The majority of the people in that room did not live in the blue zone. So there is, the staff is struggling. I'm going to assume here, the staff is struggling because every time they hold a session, they get different types of feedback from us as residents. And those of us that live in that blue zone, there's just not that many of us compared to the entire rest of the community. So when I talk to the staff, I would love to see this map be bigger. My question for you is, given the requirements of the state, if we were to make this blue map bigger, is it possible, and I'm not looking for an exact number, but hypothetically speaking, is it possible to decrease that 22, which is admittedly on the denser side, right, for those of us that live here? Is it possible to bring it down into that 15, 16, 17 range and spread it out further so that it's not as deeply concentrated?
I will try to answer that as best as I can. And the
I mean, we're talking ballparks, right?
Yeah.
Like, because what I've heard from a lot of my neighbors who live in this area is that we are disproportionately going to be affected by the density. And I'm in favor of more housing. I eventually would like my children to be able to move out. Maybe I'm adults.
You can build 2 more houses on it.
And I live on one of those small lots. So more housing is better. It would be nice if it was in a little bit of a wider area. So I will leave you with that, but to Cpdc and to all the staff who have done so much work on this over the last 6 months to a year, just thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think just to try to briefly answer, if we were to continue focusing around that half-mile area and the neighborhoods that are directly abutting that, they remain pretty small lots. So we would probably have to keep the density substantially similar. If you were to branch out into potentially the S20 zone where there are newer subdivisions and larger lots, you might be able to do a lesser density in those areas, but it would take some modeling and work to kind of figure out what that looks like.
Thank you. One last thing. It is like 1,000 degrees in here.
Yeah.
Can we open any of those windows?
We have also had like 6 hands on Zoom that we've kind of, it's only 2 right now, maybe they've lowered, but now everybody has been patiently waiting and they have as well, but we might come to them.
You keep it moving, even with people rustling around.
Thank you, John, and thanks to all of you for all your work you do. I'm wondering, Everett Blanchard, taught at the high school for 34 years, lived in a house that's in the blue zone, we're close to the edge of it, for 42 years. 99 Prescott Street, the one that has the original carriage house. Okay. I have a hard time looking at that I knew the original occupant of that house, and somebody can offer me more money and not even be telling me the whole story. Take it down and put 5 units on with 6 or 7 cars. Have a hard time hanging out our wash. It's been very tough. So I'm wondering whether you're really hearing, because when you said we've heard both, I heard very little, except on the side of what's fair. What's fair is a distribution of this. To crowd it all in, Andrew, sorry, Mr. Nichols, crowd it all in, put it up to 35 feet. The south side of the street, Prescott Street, is a nice wide street. My house has a mandatory requirement by my deed of 36 feet to the, 26 feet to the street. What happens to that? Who gets the pecking order? And I assume, since my house was built in 1894, a lot of the other houses were built about the same time. And they may be holding deeds that say certain things can happen and cannot. I would also point out that there are a lot of houses going up all over town in nooks and crannies that we don't even look like, and they're McMansions. A small cottage house comes down, a big McMansion goes up. And many of them are one family. So I really think that there's some areas we could look at that are all around the town. I don't mean crunching a little bit or opening it a little bit more. I really feel that that's what light, the south side of the street in winter, especially if you move the street in, the buildings in to 10 feet, especially if you've got a side lot line that says 20 feet, but 10 of it can be your neighbors and 10 of it can be yours. That's gonna make a lot of house on the lot. I think I'm right on that. I heard you talk about that. I have a lot of understanding. I took just the T where my house is on a corner. 38% of the houses have been or already are at least two families in them. There are 26 houses, and there are at least 10 that have or have not been. We're already carrying a load of a lot of that. And I'm really protesting the state right now when you say these things don't accumulate. Exactly. You know, we already built the metro. By the way, you don't know the whole story on the metro. The selectmen board changed the zoning on that business district to be residential so it couldn't be touched by another business. And what happened? What you get is not what you think you're getting sometimes, and I think that's part of the problem. This is going to be very, very demanding on the people in that area. It's just too crowded.
So with the not right, as Andrew just said, right, we can't really go, well, maybe we could, right? If we stretched out into a district that were in the S20 zone, right? And maybe, can you put that map up? That the density could be a little bit lower or out there. Right, the S20 is the middle purple color, right? So up to me, that's Woodendish up there, right? So we could establish a zone up there, right? That's lower density. I'm not sure much of this people in this room care whether that's lower density up there or not. But because I think I've heard it a couple of times, spread it around the town. We can't just spread it around town. We need to find specific areas, and I don't know what that acreage, there's a minimum acreage in that other like sub-district, right? We would need to identify another district in town where we can develop somewhere on the range of at a minimum 15 to 22 acres per, right? And so right, like keep that in mind when you're saying spread it around town, right? We heard the one proposal there. We've heard two proposals, one along South Main Street and one down, you know, in the neighborhood next to the interchanges. So, right, I mean, that to me, that's what I've heard. Yeah. In terms of like alternatives to the map.
Well, I would say, for example, Riverside, it splits. Splits make two units available. I don't know how you count this units versus the number of places. All you gotta do is put a door in and you can have an apartment downstairs and an apartment upstairs. But to say, we have to bear the brunt of it, that neighborhood I happen to live in is the Victorian era. The people walk those streets because they like them, they're not. You move it in 10 feet on each side, it's demolition. The amount of traffic, the number of cars, increasing cars in the downtown, there's just so many things that are saying that it has to be more equally distributed somehow. And I don't think it's just the people here, because there are a lot of people here. I heard at least two tonight say, I'm not opposed to multifamily housing, but I am opposed to making multifamily housing available and take away the light, take away the streets, take away all those pieces that make it such a beautiful neighborhood. It is, and on a historical note, some of those areas are areas that were projected to be in historic districts. And I don't know how the relation is between historic districts and what this ruling is saying, but I think it makes it a lot harder. We did 2 historic districts. Well, I'll say personally, I was involved in setting up the first historic district, West Street, and we petitioned town meeting to get it passed. Those people wanted it. They wanted Sally Hoyt getting the truck stopped. They wanted sidewalks. They wanted curbs to slow the traffic down, and we got it for them. They wanted it. West Street, Summer Ave Historic District was for a lot of different, very different reasons, but those people wanted that district. Okay, I'm not opposed to this district. I'm opposed to it being so aggressive in just that area. I think your survey did 2 things. Do you like these shorter houses? Do you like these shorter houses? Do you want people to live next to the train? And you equated the 2 to the same. One relates to the other.
Yes.
They are very independent questions. I think if I wanted public housing, I'd probably want it near the train, so I wouldn't have to have a car, okay? I moved from New Hampshire to that house so I could take 50 miles a day off my driving, okay? I think there are reasons that that would be great, but you can't correlate one thing with another on an open survey like that and read into what people think they're saying. It didn't, the survey didn't do that, for me anyway. Sorry if I'm a little emotional about this, but this is not right.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna go to Zoom for a minute.
Hi, my name is Stefan Weinisch. I live at 38 Minot Street. I live within the blue zone that's been on the screen for on and off throughout the evening. I want to start by saying I really appreciate all the efforts that the town planners and planning commission and public employees that have been trying to put this together. I recognize that it's a real hard thing to get so many, cats in the herd. So hats off to you all, and I appreciate you sticking around this late. My point of my comment really is that you've got the change in setbacks. They were larger and now they're smaller. I'd like to just suggest that maybe you just keep it 10 feet all the way around. There we go. I'm not quite sure why the required rear yard is recommended at 15 feet rather than 10 feet. It just seems to make sense to give the homeowner the flexibility, to work within their lot, to do what they want, to be good neighbors, and it seems like a pretty simple, small bore kind of change that would, I think, improve this. Overall, I'm in support of the MBTA community's proposal. And one of the biggest reasons I moved here is because I was close to transit. So I'm sure I'm not the only one out there. And I just want to emphasize that there are those of us who really do see density as a really good thing. And honestly, I'd be happy to see even more of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe just to address the setbacks, again, they're proposed to be substantially similar to the existing requirements, but also the existing forms. There are a vast amount of non-conforming structures in the area. We don't have the data because we can't put the structure specifically into GIS to find the non-conforming structures. We have the lots, but many neighborhoods have the variety of setbacks similar to Temple Street, which is why we used it as an example and why we thought 10 feet in the front wasn't taking away from the street view. We had proposed larger in the rear. We haven't gotten into the bylaw tonight, but we're trying to permit and require a level of open space and yard space and landscaped area that we want to promote. It hasn't really been talked about tonight, but again, a lot of it is back to the point that we're trying to keep it substantially similar to the existing forms in the area, and the setbacks are one example of that. We did a 10-foot side setback because there's a lot of narrow lots like this, and we thought that that would promote a more variable distribution across any neighborhood. So that's how we came to those. Without taking too far away from the existing parameters.
And that's what I think what I'm getting at is that by having a 10-foot all the way around, I think it just it sort of, if you will, it makes less impact on the neighborhoods because you have such a diversity of placement of the structure within the lot. Like for example, the house that I live in right now, I'm 4 feet, 4 feet from the lot line next to me. So I'm definitely not in compliance. So it seems that like, you're kind of spitting in the wind here. It's, you got all sorts of things. So it just conceptually, and perhaps maybe not when you put it down on paper and get it passed by, lots of different, compliance measurements. It just conceptually, it just seems simpler to do it that way. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've discussed the idea of like flexible setbacks, but we wanted to keep it simple to understand for the vast majority. So that's why we went with a prescriptive path of setbacks so that people can really kind of understand based on the existing forms and development we've seen in single family what that looks like. So I appreciate the comment though.
Thank you.
Can we take one or two more Zooms that?
Yeah, we'll have him go and then go to the back.
All right, thank you. Andrew, Mary, I want to thank you both. I know that you've been working really hard at this. And I know that this is something we don't really have a choice on. We have to follow the law, and we have to provide multifamily housing, which is 3 units per lot, within a half a mile in a certain amount. But I guess my question is, what is the required maximum unit capacity for our town?
It's just under 1,500.
And if we go with this, what is the maximum unit capacity?
Again, that was between 4,000 or 5,000.
Okay, so this is a lot bigger than it needs to be, correct?
So it comes back down to the density, right? Because we were trying to disperse the density within the half mile and equitably distribute it in the half mile, that was our parameter that we had heard to work within to date. As based on how the state calculates unit capacity, it's totally different than their density metric. They just look at the total acreage pretty much and times it by 15 in a simplified explanation. And so as we, to achieve the density of 15 units per acre, had to disperse that further and further, then it became a conversation of what are the natural boundaries and what is the distribution across the entire half mile. And the natural boundaries were started out at the center line of right-of-ways, and we heard include the other side of the street. The natural boundaries were other zoning districts, industrial, business B, commercials, and the like. And so it just naturally started to come into this form. And then because the state's unit capacity number is overly simplified, we are, of course, because we're in 3 to 4 times the acreage, or actually even closer to 10 times the acreage, the unit capacity naturally increased with that.
So don't you think it makes sense, though, to try and come up with a plan which is closer to the 1,400? I mean, I'm not saying that we should only do the bare minimum. Believe me, I know we need the housing. And I would support something which goes beyond the bare minimum. But don't you think it would be a useful exercise to come up with a plan which shows what the bare minimum is, and then what else we can do to make it better, to allow more housing? To me, it seems like 4,000 units is a lot. We don't need to go that far. And if we don't need to go that far, we don't need a footprint for our multifamily housing district as big as this. We could do it with a smaller one and still meet the state requirement.
And I'm not saying that we should limit ourselves in that manner, but I think it's something worth taking a look at, because there's obviously a lot of friction here. There's a lot of people who don't want to see a blue district this big. And this is gonna have to go before town meeting, and we're all gonna be on the phone talking to our town meeting members. And why don't we try and do something that's smaller, which does satisfy the state, and maybe gives a little bit more, which I think Lexington did, and I think Newton has done, and I think Brookline has done. And I know the other thing that's really important is we, of course, do have until the end of next year to do this, right? So we don't have to make any decision today, or in January, or in February. We can do a very well thought out process here and come out with something which I think can satisfy everybody.
And I
Yeah, so I do, right, the way that I understand it, like the 1,400 required units is a different metric than the 5,000, right? You're using different, it's a different calculation, right?
Or is it a different metric? It kind of gets funny when you combine
When you
it with
come,
the 15
right,
per
when you
acre
come in,
minimum
because you have to also meet the
Yeah.
units per acre. And so you can't,
Right.
what I want to make sure that you don't have in your head is that, oh, this generates 5,000, this district generates 5,000 units. So since we only need 1,500, then it's only going to be, what, a third of the size. That's not quite. That's
No, I
not
get
really
it,
real.
I get it, but we can make it smaller.
We can, there is, yes, absolutely, there is room to make it smaller.
That was my only
Yeah, yeah,
question,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah. I just wanted to, understand the scale, it's not.
Let's just see it.
Go to Jeff on the
Yeah.
Zoom. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I also want to thank everybody that's been working on this for their time. I do appreciate it. I've watched a lot of previous sessions, but I think this question was asked earlier, and I apologize if I missed the answer to it, but my question, by the way, Jeff Wright, 22 Kingston Street, and I'm also in this blue district. Under this proposal, if there was a scenario where a developer did manage to buy up several adjacent parcels, how would that scenario play out? Did the setbacks somehow help determine then the size of what could be built? I mean, we're aiming for, or we're kind of expressing, a lot of people have expressed a preference for what's already around, or something similar to the types of structures that are already around. Could we still end up, if 3 of my neighbors on my street all sold to a developer that was looking to do a much larger apartment building, could that happen? Or is that something you're trying to address through setback requirements?
So that is something that we're addressing through the dimensional controls, and the most prescriptive and restrictive is that 30% lot coverage. So you might have an acre lot that under the density allowance is, say, 22 units per acre, but you can only build out to 30% of that actual lot size plus the height restrictions, and so it would likely be difficult to achieve the maximum number of units when you factor in the parking, the controls, and the viable floor area of a unit. So the lot coverage has been our limiting factor proved to be.
I see. Okay, thank you for that. And I also just quickly want to echo the sentiments of the last speaker. I feel I don't know exactly what goes involved in doing scenario A, B, and C. I can imagine it's a ton of work, but I also would love to just see another scenario for comparison, especially to the point of I know there isn't a direct proportional relationship to land area in the zone compared to number of units that go towards compliance, but if we can look at something that is closer to if it's 1,400 or 1,500 required, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that, on developing some sort of alternate proposal that looks more like that as well.
So yeah, I mean, we can work in and around that. Thank you. It's hard to like project to what gets the minimums needed because of the variety of controls, and if we do go too small, you start to get into the need to either lessen parking, allow 4 stories by right, or potentially more lessen setbacks to 5 feet in the front or similar. So the smaller you go, the the less control we have to match what we've heard. And so, yes, we can right now shave off bits and corners and probably keep it substantially similar. But we can't, keep shrinking and shrinking without altering the dimensional controls at some point.
So I do, want to get other people to provide their comment. What I'm sort of thinking is that, we haven't got to the meat of the proposal of the zoning. You know, Andrew has talked a little bit about the dimensional controls and and that sort of thing that's actually in the zoning. I think what I'd like to do for our next public hearing is have, I'm going to say at least one alternative map, which is this, I'm going to say still centers around the downtown, but is like the minimum build. And another one, and I think that maybe, we can put our heads together of an alternative that does look at different there's a minimum size of the core size around there, and then if there's another zone or two that we could have, in town, so that what I want to make sure, because during our next meeting, we need to get to the zoning, and I know a lot of the discussion here has really been about the map and the density. I think if we have some alternative maps, we'll focus on the zoning, and then we can have a sort of a discussion on the maps, how big, how little, which is sort of I don't want to say it's a different discussion, but it's a different part of the discussion.
It is,
Yeah.
Will there be one with a larger zone that shows like how it lessens the density? I mean, that's what I would personally like to see. Not so much.
Yeah, I think you might have stepped out when
Okay,
you
I
said
did. I
that.
had to
Yeah,
step out there. Sorry.
we have some limitations on
Alright.
how much we can spread it out. But
Okay.
we'll.
If I can ask, I guess, then to the board and public at large, if we go outside of this zone, is this still the form of multifamily housing desirable? Or are we talking Main Street 4-story mixed-use development desired instead in lieu of that? Because
Still small. Excuse me, I just want to say, I mean, when I spoke, John, earlier, I don't understand why you keep saying that, because, and I'm not advocating anybody's particular neighborhood.
You do need to, I'm sorry, you gotta need to come up.
Andrew, you keep bringing this up, that it's like, well, it has to be a 4-story, it's gonna be much larger. And I'm not advocating anybody's neighborhood and so on and so forth, and I realize we wanna have better housing and more affordable housing. I think the issue that we talked about here tonight is just, this is all crammed into this area, and I know it works for a lot of your numbers, but I could think of a lot of other neighborhoods that are close to buses. They're nice neighborhoods, there are other areas, they're
so that's
walkable.
why I'm asking.
They're adjoining to the highway and so forth. You could still have 40% of your multifamily housing. next to
Exactly
the
what I
train
just
station.
said, is right.
Right.
But what he was asking, what Andrew was asking is, you've heard some about the form of the multifamily, that we've been talking about here. The alternative that we could put forward is, no, we actually want, we want to develop a zone that has, 4 or 5 story, 50, 60 unit, developments. And we have stepped aside from that and tried to keep it as smaller, forgetting about where it is, we're just on what's the form. In our focus, I think it's going to still continue to be keeping it that same form of, of what we've been talking about, in looking at different places in town, not looking at different forms.
That's
And
consistent with what
that's
I've heard, and
what
there is
I've heard,
somebody who
yes.
hasn't spoken
Yeah.
yet.
Right,
I know this, who is
and
waiting
just to
speak.
finish, I would say that a lot of these neighborhoods, and if you look at Newton and other plans, where they have similar types of housing being on quarter acres, a lot of us are on quarter acres, et cetera, et cetera. If you look across town in some of these other zones, or let's call them villages or whatever, that are close to bus, close to highway, I would think that your maps could show us something that would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
So Andrew, in answer to your question, what I'm hearing at least, and I've heard it before, is that people still generally like the smaller scale
Mhm.
as opposed to larger, and what I'm hearing is an interest in finding a broader distribution of that.
That's what I've heard, I just wanted.
I know you're just trying to confirm it, thank you.
Hi, thank you, John Sullivan, 23 Weston Road, and I've got a few questions which I think are hopefully pretty quick, but they're a little scattered because I've been jotting stuff down. Gentleman who's up here, a couple of times, we mentioned Lexington, and I saw there was a news article today that they're one of the 2 communities that have been certified by the state on their MBTA plan. And the Globe article, as long as I read it correctly, I think they zoned 3 times the amount of acres that they had to at at the density that they chose.
Right.
So it wasn't a case of them going like really small and just kind of trying to focus. It was a big.
They were required to zone 50 and they zoned almost 230 acres.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess we read the same thing. Just to clarify, in this zone, it's the new multi-unit zone. You're still allowed to build single-family houses there if this passes.
That is
So
correct.
You
So-
can build a single family. You can keep your single family.
Yep.
If you're on a currently non-conforming lot in this zone, and that this change passes, your lot would be most likely become conforming.
As long as it meets the
It's
minimum
more
lot
than
size and
5,000.
frontage, which was 90+% of lots, there are some lots that are smaller than 5,000 square feet, they wouldn't be eligible for this type of use, but
And
it's
so
less than 10%.
And so where I'm sorry, I'm gonna enter, right, I just wanna make sure that people understand that, right, if you're then conforming, the flexibility that you have to do something to your single-family home within your lot means that you won't have to go to the ZBA to do everything like put on a deck and da-da-da. As long as you fit within those, those.
So that was the co-benefit of the proposal, is
Yes.
bringing more into conformance and also promoting smaller single-family housing outside of the McMansion. Somebody mentioned that's the only thing that zoning allows for today, to be built.
And then if we go to the 22 units per acre density, all those lots are, I think, I had the spreadsheet earlier, like between like the 5,000 to 7,000 square foot lots would not become conforming, and then they would lose that kind of freedom to do extra stuff on their property without extra hoops to jump through.
So as long as the lots met whatever our approved lot sizes and frontages minimums where, yes.
But at 22 units an acre, then those 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square foot lots would not be conforming, and so they wouldn't have the reduction in hoops to jump through if they wanted to do something on their property.
Sorry, could you try to clarify that a bit more?
The
So
lots
right
would be
now-
conforming, right?
No, if you're on a 5,000
If you're on a
square foot
5,000,
lot,
right,
at
if.
20, I'm sorry, at 22 units an acre, you're conforming. At 15 units an acre, you're not
Oh,
conforming.
so this is a maximum. So again, on a 5,000 square foot lot, you can do 1 unit, 2 units, or 3. 3 is your maximum, but you can do anything under that, and that's the same for every lot size.
Right. I bet if you are on a 5,000 square foot lot and we, instead of doing 22 units an acre in this zone, do 15 units an acre, that doesn't meet the 3 max units for MBTA, would your lot still be non-conforming for a single family home? If conforming is 20,
So if I'm understanding right, if I lowered the density to 15 units per acre on a 5,000 square foot lot, it wouldn't get us those lots to comply in the compliance model because they wouldn't achieve 3 units definition, but they would still be eligible for a single and potentially 2 if 15 units per acre met 2 units max.
But we wouldn't be able
But
to
we-
count, like, say somebody was in a lot like that, they could conform with zoning and build a 2-unit building, but the town wouldn't be able to count that toward compliance with MBTA.
I'm not asking about compliance
Yeah.
with MBTA. I'm saying if you have a 5,000 square foot lot and within the zone, and the zone is 22 units an acre, your lot is now conforming. And if you want to put an addition on it, it's easier.
Your lot is now compliant with MBTA.
But it's also.
And
it's
compliant with
also
zoning.
conforming.
Yes, you're conforming.
If the density is 15 units an acre and you're not in compliant, that lot is not in compliance with MBTA, is it still non-conforming?
No, it would be conforming.
So we would change the conformance rules for the whole.
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of two different things, right? You would be conforming with zoning because that's a base zoning, it's 5,000 square feet and you're conforming and you can do whatever fits within zoning. This 15 versus 22 units per acre, that's really more to be in compliance with MBTA communities.
I guess
That helps a lot. And then I think the last thing was, one of your previous slides showed that median household income versus housing price, and I think you can check my math, but it's now over, the ratio of housing cost to income is now over 6 based on those numbers. And there was a slide, I think, of the Economic Development Forum that went back to 1980, and I looked at that this morning when I was going through some of this stuff, and in 1980, the ratio of housing cost to income was 2.5. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
So that seems like quite the jump. I think this is kind of indicative that something is not working with our housing stock and the housing in our community. So I think I'm not in this zone. I've given you guys feedback that I would like to be included in this zone.
I know you have.
So I mean, I guess I think we clearly need more housing. Oh, and there's one other thing. If we start changing the zone outside of downtown, if you start going up towards Home Goods or south on Main Street, then people who live by Home Goods, I imagine every time they're running errands in town, they're going to the bank, they're going out to dinner, they're buying comic books, comic book store, they're driving from there. People who live closer to downtown, I live just outside the circle, we walk in all the time. We're expanding the zone and adding more housing further away. We're going to increase traffic and strain on parking, which I understand is kind of an issue downtown. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go to Zoom.
Sally is. Hopefully she can.
Is she there?
He doesn't seem to be able to mute, so we can jump. Yeah.
Everybody's watching.
If we can, we are still in the public hearing, so if we can.
Thanks. Jared Beliveau, 11 Grand Street. It sounds like a common concern among many neighbors is the idea of not necessarily that our neighbors are going to overdevelop their properties, but that developers are going to come in and overdevelop whatever the zone that is designated. And so it seems to me that really what we're trying to get at is how do we minimize the degree to which we're giving up control over our zoning, i.e., it no longer goes before the ZBA. And so, number one, it seems that to do that, we should be including within the zone areas that are already densely zoned and increase the zoning, right? So I know we said that we're not including downtown because of commercial reasons, but didn't the MBTA zoning regulations get revised to include that? And so Newton and Brookline, which have been brought up a few times, are all doing it within business zones. So I'm not quite sure whether this was done before that change was made. Was it?
This was derived in the middle of that release, and so that mixed use regulation states that you can use 25% of your unit capacity in mixed use. The other 75% has to be multifamily.
Okay, so we could include downtown without risking mixed use development.
To a level, it would take some playing with, but if we were to include a similar concept of abutting it and mixed use, mixed use downtown, we might be able to find something.
Okay. And arguably for places that are already developed, like the Postmark, that are already over 3 stories tall, that we could have denser development and thereby squeeze the whatever the toy is that you were describing, right? What about Reading Woods, right? That's a huge development. If we just slap that in there and say count it, what does that do for us? So I'm not suggesting these specific things, but there are things that could count right now that would allow us to shrink this district. And I think that's one thing we should be considering that I would like to see on the next map, and I'm a town meeting member. So when we say how small can you make it, I think it should be including things that are already densely developed. We're not saying, take our dense development and leave that alone because we want more dense development, right? We should be counting as much dense development as possible. That's one point. The second point is relating to 40B, right? So we're eventually going to trip 40B if we have an expansive zone, 85% of which is all under the 10-unit minimum that would trigger a affordable housing. So I don't recall what your numbers are, but if we build 200 units over the course of a decade, then to stay within 40B, roughly, we're gonna have to build 200 other units to include so that we can get to the 10%, right? Well, unless we build them ourselves somehow, right? Are we gonna get in the business of building affordable housing?
So to step back 2 steps, in terms of the 40R, like I'm open to looking at it. You are one of few who has asked us to look at it because in 2021, 2022, town meeting did amend, or staff and town meeting alike amended the 40R district, and to use it for MBTA community's sake, I would have to reverse nearly every approved control that town meeting passed in 2022. I would have to lessen the parking. I would have to probably increase the density allowances. I would have to remove potentially the density cap. So I would have to go back and reverse a lot of things that were just decided in the last 2 years or so for that to comply. And that's why it's the other reason we've steered away from 40R, because we heard town meeting and we don't really want to reverse everything that they had decided then so soon.
South of Washington Street.
But in fairness, that was a different context, right? We weren't talking about a total zoning rechange. So,
Right.
and sorry, let me clarify what
yeah.
I'm saying about the 40B. I understand how 40B works, right?
Yep.
So once we fall below the 10%, that opens the entire town to development as what was described earlier. And the reason they get to do that is because they're gonna promise to build some amount of affordable housing, right? So the other benefit, including downtown, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, under the law, you're grandfathered in with your affordable housing threshold being higher than 10%. Is that true?
That is true, because we have an existing 25% requirement for rentals. We can maintain that.
Okay, so in that, so we doubly protect ourselves from falling outside of 40B in that sense, right? Or we doubly benefit from using the downtown district. More to the point, the more lots that we include, the bigger the district we make, and include places that developers are likely to come in and redevelop. So not Reading Woods, because nobody's tearing down all those apartment buildings to build something else. The more that we're gonna add units to our housing stock that do not count towards affordable, and then the rest of the town is gonna be open up. So this is very much not a precinct 5 or immediate downtown. This is eventually gonna trigger concerns for the entire town, and I think they should be aware of that, because my intent is to live in this town as long as I'm alive, and so I don't want to be here 10 years from now and say, oh, I saw it coming, guys, and so the development down the street from you, we could have prevented that, because the recent things that I've just read in the news, so the 128 Tire litigation, the South Main Street Pineville stuff, developers are going to come in and do whatever they can get away with. And so we need to keep our arms around as much of the land as possible. That's my perspective. So whatever we draw needs to be as small as possible. And that's not to say somebody can't come in and propose to develop something else, and we can give them permission to do that, right? We can do that on an ad hoc basis. No? We can't?
No.
Okay, well, if we can't do that, then that's fine by me too. Because what I don't want is my neighbor's property to be, snatched up in their neighbor's property, as already described, in multiple scenarios. The Gizmundos online were offering that scenario. And, I think that's people's biggest fear, is the distrust of what developers are going to come do to make a quick buck. And so anything that we can do to keep as much of the land under our control as possible, I think is the way we should proceed. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Just one quick add-on to that, if I may. It's a new thought.
Sure.
Dave Talbot, 75 Lane. I just wanted to ask in the temperature of the room on, like, you look at the car wash and the Jiffy Lube and the McDonald's, the famous McDonald's. These are, over the last 10 years, we've had an economic boom, but these have not been developed into better commercial uses. And to me, a 3 or 4 story apartment complex as part of a village style, to the gentleman from Grand Street's point, I mean, to me, that seems actually, that's not a bad idea. Like, would you consider that? And would people be horrified to see something like, you know, then that's south of Washington, and that's not the 40R, because that's right, it's the 40R stops at Washington and the tracks, right?
Yeah.
So just as one example of the village concept of that could be one small piece, and recognizes that those things have not become better commercial developments. Just a thought.
Yeah.
That's all.
So I'm very cognizant as a planner of our SHI and our affordable housing needs and maintaining above 10%. I know I don't live here, but my job is to do what's in the best interest of Reading, and that's what I always try to do. And 10% I feel is a good goal and strong goal to achieve it. So this proposal in MBTA communities, and given their restrictions on affordable housing, is not the end all be all in terms of a housing answer, right? When we talk about the housing shortage, it's just one answer, one potential answer. And so when we talk affordability requirements at 25% or 20%, you are talking much denser housing requirements for the economic feasibility for those things to work out. That's how you get to the 50 units at Postmark. And that's the exact density we've heard that isn't desired right now. And so it's hard to achieve both in one. And so that's where we've been cognizant that, yes, this can help support housing and housing variety and maybe not directly add to the SHI without some of those larger parcels being developed. But there are other avenues that still exist, like the downtown, if a developer wanted to propose on it. Our mixed use in South Main Street has inclusionary zoning requirements at 10%, but it just comes with a level of density that through discussions at large and through the very specific applications we hear are undesirable to a degree for many, and so that's why we've steered away from it here. But I hear
Just
loud
that
and
it's-
clear maintaining 10% is definitely a goal.
But it might be a little bit of a red herring to think that people are categorically against that type of housing. It's context dependent, and there's some sites where it could be very nice and very beneficial to the town, like the car wash.
I will say, right, as a board, we have over the years, right, we try and keep the commercial. You know, there's in other town forums, right, there's always a discussion about how we rely from a tax base too much on our residential properties, and you know, and like I don't want to continue to go down that slope of like, yeah, sure, just put residential there, right? It happens anyways because that's where the money is, right? So try and do what we can to stop that. But I get your point, Dave.
So just to kind of tack on to what you say, is it possible to have
like your name real quick?
Oh, Jonathan Trevick, Temple Street. Is it possible to have different density, like you have one blue zone, same sort of rules and controls applied across all lots? Is it possible to have sort of tiered zoning? He was talking about, you know, could we reclassify a small area of commercial and put in really high residential and kind of try to lower the threshold for the rest of the control district? Is there other options than just a blanket blue district? Can we have dark blue district? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yeah, we have considered that, and we've heard that concept thrown out at other engagement events. We had shied away from it because it starts to get really dense, right? If 22 units per acre is somewhat dense for a lot, if we start to up that in other areas outside of downtown, it's a perception thing.
Yeah,
of
I
what
mean, to
that
make it
means,
that all 20, you know, the blue area, all 22 would be high,
Right.
but in the right areas that the town sort of tacitly agrees is a good place for high density development might work, is all
Yeah.
I'm saying, as a proposal to then you could shrink the blue area, you could make it low density, something
Yes,
like that.
agreed. Like we could aim downtown to do density there and then lessen the dispersion of the blue here. If we
Yeah,
were
just
able
a
to- yeah.
thought. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. John Sasso, 66 Richards Road. I'm also a town meeting member. A lot of stuff, but I'm going to just try to stay focused on a few specific issues. First of all, I do question the rate of redevelopment. I think someone brought it up earlier. This is uncharted territory. You're talking about moving out of a single family zone into something that we haven't had in the community. I can tell you right in my neighborhood, I think we've had 6 house tear downs in the last 3 or 4 years. The last one, they bought the house for $700,000 and tore it down. So I don't put anything past the developer to buy multiple lots up and do expanded zoning. So I really caution us on that. What I heard tonight regarding, trying to minimize the impact in this downtown area, I think there is some fairness here. We need to be clear about trying to bring this down a bit. And as Dave mentioned a little while ago, finding other areas within the community where even if we had to increase the zoning density but the location and context was still appropriate, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing. And finding those areas, that's up to you guys. You said earlier, draw a map and zone it. We're not the experts, you guys are. So I really ask, and I know you've put a lot of work into this, and I really do appreciate that. But I want to point out just a couple things that to add some more context to this. But I do want to ask a question before I miss. So does the law not allow you to do a affordability component even at base zoning?
The law allows you to do a 10% requirement at 80% AMI. If you go above that, it triggers economic feasibility analysis and testing.
But I'm talking about, you said, but that only kicks in if it's above 10 units.
So
in the proposed zoning that you said earlier.
Yeah, so they say 10%. We set the trigger. We thought 10 we had tried for. So actually, I'll step back. I can't do, right. Our intent fully was to try to get to 8 units at 10% to stay above the 10%, right, kind of build out. But because the state only restricts you and allows you 10% of units, if we did say trigger at 8 units, 10%, it starts to round up, put over 10% when you start to round up, because 1 unit out of 8 is in actually 12.5%. Thus, I'm not compliant with the law. So I had to set the trigger at 10 to remain consistent with
So
the
they're saying you can't say a 10% even though it
Yeah.
to your point rounds up.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I view this obviously as an unfunded mandate for the community, quite frankly, and all the impacts that people have talked about tonight are going to impact the entire community, not just the area. I know the folks in the school committee, I was speaking with them, and they're looking at, we're trying to go build a new school, what's going to be next. You said in one of your earlier slides, about a third of the residents have kids under 18. So, just take any number of those units that get built and figure out the population additions, and we're already, understaffed in the school input. And the infrastructure questions that were brought up, I don't think you're gonna know the answers to those until you actually build them, unfortunately. Which I don't think is a good approach. I want to, you had a number of comments in the write-up about the diversity of housing and things like that. And I just want to add some context to that. So a lot of that came out of the 2005 master plan. And as an author to that, I just want to add some context that the idea about diversity at the time was focused on, I'd say 3 or 4 things. One was accessory apartments, which we did actually do. Carriage houses was the second one we did. And then mixed use. We actually did a mixed use zone before we did the 40R district. And the fourth was to actually focus on affordability and the push on the production plan. So I don't want to lose that from this perspective that it wasn't, the intention was not a wholesale change to locals, to single family zoning. I realize the state's forcing us to do that. And while I don't necessarily, agree that's the right way to go, we're going to have to comply with it. So I agree with a lot of what folks have said tonight. Let's try to find ways to minimize this, minimize the impact, spread it out into some other areas where it makes sense. But I'm just going to read one sentence out of the master plan that really reminded me of what Reading and the community and some other folks were saying. The image of Reading as a peaceable, family-oriented, single-family suburban residential community remains a powerful, self-defining ideal against which the town's citizens judge the quality of real conditions in the town and the nature of the changes to it. So I want to leave you with that, is that's really the basis. Now, we haven't done an updated master plan. As you know, we've asked for that to happen. But this is the last indelible mark that we've left on the community, that this is going to have significant impact no matter how you slice it. And I would ask, as a town meeting member, from my perspective, minimize the impact on the single-family communities, minimize the impact on how it's going to affect all the things we talked about, the services, the communities, the schools, infrastructure. Find ways to put these, there definitely have to be some other places that we can find where we can do some overlays and other areas where we can increase density. I think the community would be okay with that in the right context, and not leave it all to one area in one zone. They've already felt the impact of the 40R zone, which, you know, shame on us. We didn't realize how significant of an impact that was going to be when it came through, and that's why town meeting made those changes a year and a half ago, was to recognize that, you know, having a concrete wall on somebody's lot line was not the intention of the 40R district. The last thing I'll mention, just parking. So are you required to reduce the parking to 1.25 space per unit?
We are not required in residential. If we do mixed use, it has to be 0 spaces for commercial uses, I believe.
Because, you know, we already have a parking problem downtown, and this is not going to make it any better. And I don't, you know, we can all talk about, oh, it's great, they're only going to be one car because they're close to a commuter rail. That is not the case. So I don't know if you have the ability to increase that back up, but I would certainly strongly recommend you consider that if it's a viable alternative, because it is not something, we're gonna be like Cambridge and Somerville, parking permits on the streets at that point, because that's exactly where we'll be under those circumstances when you start to get that level of development and those numbers of spaces. We already have overflow downtown. It's going to go into those neighborhoods, and they already feel it today. So I'm not a fan of keeping that low. Thank you very much.
So before he starts, I do, right, this room, right, full of, as someone had asked, right, full of folks from downtown. I do want to mention, right, we were in, is it we are at the library, right, one of your presentations, and there's a discussion, right, there was different maps, and, right, the feedback that I heard was, why would we go small, right? Because that room was, I don't want to project, right, but it was a different demographic, it was a different group of people, and those people, you know, what I heard was, we need more housing. We need more housing. We need more housing. And why would we why would we try and, you know, game the system and keep the zone small? Because we want to comply with the intent of MBTA communities. Certainly, none of those people are here today, but I want you guys to know that every meeting you go to, you do have a different perspective, a different group that comes out, you know, and that's our job, right, is to hear all that and sort of put it out. But I want you guys to understand that what you're hearing tonight is not the same thing that you hear at every meeting, because there's a different cross section of Reading that comes to different meetings.
Yeah, I get that, and my name is Chris DiMattei. I live at 172 High Street, and I'm in the proposed blue zone. And I think you speak exactly to what part of the problem is, right? I mean, you guys talk about numbers and units, and none of it, it talks about the character of the neighborhood, right? The visual impact that these changes will make, right? So, I mean, I live in a historic home. My house is significant to the town, to the state, whatever. It's a 1890s Victorian. It would take a developer a day to demolish that, and my lot size would allow for 6 units that can be built up to 10 feet of my side yards and my front yard. That will completely change the character of my neighborhood, right? I live in an area where there's all historic homes. There are no provisions in this that addresses anything with respect to the historic character of the neighborhoods. there are, and I asked Andrew this in an email, there are no protections for historic properties, whether they're in historic districts or individually listed with state registers, local registers, town, national registers. There are no protections. So the developers can come in and if the Parker House was privately owned, they could tear that down and build whatever the hell they want. And that's just wrong.
So, right, in the spirit of, all right, what should we change, right? Your vote is let's make sure there are some historic. Right?
Yeah, my vote
Right,
might be to increase the size of this district and then put in protections for historic properties so they can be excluded from the zone, right? And then we can create historic districts that could be excluded, so you don't drastically change the character of the neighborhoods.
So I can't individually pick lots to exclude from zoning, right? A developer could come in and propose to tear down that same historic house and replace it with the McMansion single family. And so whether it's one family or three family, the protections are the same. And that's what was equally and equitably discussed, was that we're not lessening regulations. It's not that there's no regulations, it's that zoning does not regulate historic properties. We have a separate bylaw for that, which again, we have been open to and are continuing to discuss with the historic committee and the historic district committee. We're not including local historic districts, but if we can up their regulations to say, instead of a 6-month demo delay, say 12 months, to give somebody more time to figure out how can we preserve this. We're also, that hasn't been discussed tonight, is working on a design book and pattern book, because while our goal and vision with the zoning is to substantially match the forms and character, we want to add a design book to accompany this to say, we would rather see you do this type of form and this type mansard roof, pitched roof, flat roof. What can those look like? And put real visuals to them so that we can better understand what this housing
with all
That's
due
an as of
respect,
right. If you're as of right though, that
yeah, the
means
zoning
nothing, right?
doesn't provide for that.
Right.
The zoning basically says,
I know.
all you can do is meet the level of the floor plan review, which is essentially the site plan review, and then you have to conform to local building codes.
Right.
There's no protections in there, and that's why
Zoning
That's
is
why my
never
biggest-
protected design. Zoning is
Right,
never
but
protected
this-
exterior forms, and it
this
won't have.
particular zone basically just opens up the door to developers and gives them a get out of jail free card, because they don't even have to, they don't have to conform to anything, as long as they meet the site plan review and the building code review. They can do whatever they want. They can tear down my house and they can build a 3-story, 6-unit residential building out of
They can't build a 3-story brick building. They could build something that's 35 feet high, right? Like,
They could build it out of containers, shipping containers, and as long as it meets the building code, they could do that. And that would completely.
35 feet high, yes.
Exactly.
Nonetheless, not like bigger than we are, right?
Yeah, so for us, we try to understand how that's different from single family and why we're saying multifamily should be excluded from that process, but single family can be included. And we understand that single family is the predominant character of Reading, and that's why we're trying to keep 90+% of land in Reading single family zone.
Yes, but that
we
map
also
targets the largest majority of historic structures in this town was all in that blue area.
That is likely true. That is, yes.
It's
And we're
definitely
very
true.
cognizant of that. I love historic houses personally. I want a historic house if I can ever afford one. So it's not something we're ignoring or trying to promote the tear downs of historic structures.
Right, but I
Again,
think it's naive to think that developers who could care less about anything but the bottom line are gonna even consider that. And by delaying the demolition from 6 months to 12 months, he'll just wait it out. Because there's no argument you can make other than the house is important to the community that would dissuade him from doing that, and he's not gonna care because he
So
doesn't.
can I, right, going back to what's the proposal, right? Because, right, as you said, this is not only, right, that we have historic districts, but we have a lot of historic buildings, homes
Yep.
in this area. And by the state, right, we can't put those other restrictions on that. I mean, my neighborhood is historic. Every but one was built, you know, over 100 years ago. One was moved from downtown up the street, right? It's actually a four unit, and no one could tell, right? No one even knows that, except if you happen to know the owner, that there's 4 units in there. My point though is, what do we want to do, right? What's the proposal? Do we want to, is the proposal you're saying is let's avoid the entire downtown and put that zoning
No,
up
my
by-
proposal would be to exhaust every possibility to include what's already built. In some, you said though, that 40R whatever building across the street from, you know, if this zone included that building, it would be made compliant, right? Why are there not other opportunities for us to do that same avenue with some of the other existing structures and all along Haven Street and all along Main Street, where the character of those areas is already high-rise residential and commercial and business? And why can't we create a zone that says you can do commercial on the ground floor and residential above the ground floor? And now you can have a combination, you preserve the commercial and business and still provide for additional residential.
May I ask a
above.
question about that? Because I think we've heard proposals like this just a few times tonight. And I can say from my perspective, CPDC also heard before the MBTA communities law passed, resoundingly, that people did not like what was happening in the 40R district. Heard it at town meeting, heard it at every hearing. There's another proposal for South Main Street that a whole neighborhood came out at last week to say, we can't stand this. So,
why?
hold
What
on,
was
hold
their
on, hold on.
argument
You're
against
not getting me to my question.
Okay.
Because it's too much, because it's too high, it's too much traffic, it's too many people. Those are the kinds of things. So my question is, what we allow, what will meet the compliance for MBTA communities has to be allowed by right. And that means, for instance, hypothetically, if we were to change the downtown smart growth district into mixed use that meets the density requirements, the town also loses a lot of control over what gets proposed and what we basically, those are all there, they're usually seeking some variance, has to be allowed by right. So a question is, you know, along with the proposals to say, let's do large dense apartment buildings, is the proposal also to say, let them build whatever they want?
And so,
Because that's not consistent with what we consistently hear at this board. And
So
that's
now
one
your-
thing we're
So your
battling.
answer is to let developers do whatever they want across the entire town.
Well, I'm asking a genuine question. I didn't mean it as a challenge, that this is the challenge that we have as a community, is where and what level do we allow by right?
so if I can step back on 2 points. One on like something like the 40R in downtown. Again, we'd have to reopen for development at a lesser control, and I still need that zoning district for MBTA communities to reach 15 units per acre. And so for it to be any terms of compliant with MBTA zoning, right now, I think when we tested it in early TA, it was at what, 8 units per acre or something like that. So I would have to just really, the town would have to really reopen downtown for that type of development by right, without even the discretionary waiver process. And so, secondly, right, a lot of people, I guess this is where I try to understand, say that this area is the character of Reading. You can't build this today. We're trying to allow the similar form of development that this character is. And I know there's angst of what a developer may or may not do, but you can't build this housing stock today. Smaller single family housing lots, you just can't do it. And we've heard repeatedly through subdivisions that the McMansions are not the desired style of development either, only. So we're just trying to re-allow for this type of housing in its exterior form, and the only thing that would change is the potential number of interior units, but it could substantially stay the same. You have 1,000 individual actors here, all selling at different times, buying at different times. It could be a young adult moving in on their first time home and just wants a single family home like a vast majority of us probably do. It could be someone looking to allow their mother to move in, where you're just trying to re-allow these forms that many have said are the character and consistent with Reading, and the forms and controls we've put keep that consistency, and there's much data to back that up. And so that's where we have come from, of this is in line with the character and visions. It just comes down to what everybody has been discussing. What is the actual dispersion of that? And so
I think it's not, sorry, I'm taking this.
No, that's all right. You can jump
I'm sorry, before you, is there, right, because I think we've got a number of people I know that want to speak again.
I don't want to
And-
speak for anything new. I want to speak about what he just asked about, because I'm on the Historic District Commission. And I set up the two districts, and we have a meeting Wednesday night. I believe it's 7:00 in Hopkinton, but I'll have to check on that. You probably know better
I
than
will
I
be
do.
there at 7 p.m. in the
And
conference room.
it's been proposed to me and by several different people, what other restrictions can you put in place? One of the major problems about Massachusetts law is this committee controls this, and this committee controls this, and this committee controls it, and you can't jump through all the hoops and make everybody happy. But I think what he's dealing with is possibly a historic district, and the town has not supported it. They had a 12-month demolition delay, and they moved it to 6 months, which really played havoc with their ego, I think, and therefore it makes it very hard to work. It was actually a historical commission. But that's the sort of thing that we might be able to look at and put a restriction. You don't have to do it, but we might have to do it.
I am open to that conversation, as I have
Well,
mentioned many times that I
just,
want
we
to
need
have
more
that
ideas
conversation.
and things like that. I don't know if anybody else has done this. And I kept saying, you've got a secret bullet that you can maybe let go with us. But I think that might answer some of your questions, if we can find some way to put restrictions on
Yeah,
it.
I'll be there on Wednesday.
But it does present
I would
problems.
encourage, if there's time, and admittedly I haven't had the time locally to dig into other local historic bylaws, but if there's a community that you know and feel has a strong historic feel or bylaw that you're aware of, please dig into it and bring notes, because we just want to understand what is possible. While not being overly restrictive, we understand that there's the goal to protect historic assets, and so
I know Rick Skelly,
again, I'm
the
open to
former
that
state commissioner
conversation.
for historic stuff, says, oh, that stuff has to start from ground roots. And he retired 2 years later, you know? There's a difficulty with this, but we don't know how to handle it. And by the way, one of the historic district houses is on your map, the corner one of Woburn and Summer Ave. That's in the historic district. It's on the blue section.
Ellen,
I'll
are
play
you
both
there
sides
on
of
the
the coin.
Zoom? You can go ahead.
Okay, my name is Ellen Childress, and I do live within this blue zone. And I want to reiterate what Sasso was saying about the parking. It's not realistic. And if you do decrease it, I want to point out something. People who are older, this was a growing demographic, have people come in who give services. When I was young, I would take someone who was deafblind and drive them and do different things. This meant they didn't have a handicap sticker because deafblind people don't drive a car. And I had to get them to the car. So if you're not going to have more parking spaces, but you're going to have a multi-unit house, I'd like to propose something like a, services parking spot, where people who provide services for the elderly will be able to park their car and come in, or if they're picking up somebody who is somewhat handicapped. In other words, some kind of provision for that.
Thank you, Ellen. We can definitely try to consider that. It's not something I've seen in zoning before, but I can look into that a bit. And we probably won't delve too much into the specifics of bylaw language on parking tonight, but what we had proposed of 1.25 with the vast majority of units we were expecting was typically a 1 parking space difference, and that helped us get the density needs to across the district. We can test it by bumping up back to 1.5, but when we were talking a 1 space difference, it seemed negligible where we're not having employees, customers, commuters, residents, and others all vying for the same parking spaces like they are downtown, where this was predominantly keeping to the residential peoples of a dwelling. So that's where we felt the lesser proposal is viable, because unlike downtown, you don't have all those competing users, and because it was typically a 1 maximum 2 space difference, we had thought it was viable, but we can certainly go back and test what 1.5 if we can get the density there.
I suggest you contact Mystic Valley Elder Services who provide it in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
The parking situation, and I spoke a little bit on this, it's not even close to realistic. Like, what families do you know, truly, other than single parent families? What families do you know that have 1 car? They all have at least 2 cars, and then when the teenagers start driving, they have more cars. This housing is being built for families. I mean, that's one of the conditions for the MBTA community law, is that the housing has to be suitable for children. So, you know, I'm sure you're talking about housing units that have 2 or 3 or whatever, 4-bedroom units, however they build them. 1.25 parking spaces, there's no way that is enough parking. And it's okay if you had one, you know, you have 1 multifamily unit on a street, because they have the whole street they could kind of park on and share with all the single residences. But when you start having multifamily after multifamily after multifamily that the developers build, where's everybody gonna park? There's not gonna be enough parking spaces on the street, there's not gonna be any downtown, there's gonna be no parking. Like, people aren't, I don't think as many people commute into Boston as like you think. Like, I know they want housing near the T so you can commute into town, but a lot of people are just gonna commute up to Portsmouth, they need a car to get there, and you know, the other parent needs to drive their kids to school and hockey practice. Like, it's just not reasonable to expect 1.25 parking spaces for a family. I mean, how many people do you know really? Like, how many families do you know with children that have 1 car? It's none. Thank you.
Maybe just to add to, these are minimum proposals, setbacks and parking. Somebody can always exceed these. Builders are typically very in tune to their parking needs for the housing that they're proposing, and same with setbacks. So these are minimums, but during site plan review process, that's where we review all of these and say, hey, maybe you should add a spot here. Maybe if you have this many bedrooms, maybe you should. Yeah, so it all gets reviewed and does look for those goals, right? Because we're not oblivious to the fact that there is still going to be cars in the neighborhood. So just wanted to mention that. But,
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vanessa Alvarado, Mount Vernon Street. So I actually also, I have a comment and a question on the parking. So I have similar concerns about the minimum parking. I think 1.25 in a suburban area is unrealistic. And I think, to the point earlier of developers doing sort of whatever they can get away with, they will, right? We've seen it. So anything we can do to create caps on what they can do, either in combining lots or I know we have the height restrictions and the setbacks, et cetera. I think that's a great thing. So thank you for taking that into consideration. I agree. I think the parking needs to be higher. It is 10:30. I have to imagine that the staff has started their day at 7 o'clock in the morning and have gone straight through. So what is the process for those of us that are still hanging out here in the room or at home? So are you voting on something here tonight? Are you continuing the hearing? What?
Yeah, we have, I don't, maybe, because Andrew has dates, Andrew and Mary have dates.
So we did never come into this one expecting that this was a one conversation and done. So we've pre-scheduled some additional hearing dates on January 22nd and February 5th, specific for this hearing because we want to keep it to itself. I think we'll probably continue to that date and no sooner. Trying to run through the idea of like if we continued to the earlier meeting, but not gonna do that.
And could we get that scheduled in the library so we have a little more?
Yeah, so we had tried to schedule this in the library, but I think the same for the 22nd. I'll double check, but we'll at minimum find a bigger location if we can. We just also want to allow the hybrid because we had 100 Zoom participants, which limits our choices. But yes, we will look at that. There is no notice or mailing of the continued date or next hearings. I would suggest on our website there's a subscriber list and you can subscribe to stay up to date with this, and we've been blasting those people regularly. We'll definitely continue to do that, and that's your best bet is on our project web page and the subscribe function because there's no new mailing notices that go out. So just be cognizant of that.
And then you also mentioned that there's going to be individual precinct meetings targeting announcements to town meeting members. Is that also true?
That's the staff intent and hope. We have to see if there's a relevant number of peoples in those precincts who wish to meet with us. So we're.
And will that be sent out on the subscribe, the town notice, like?
Those we've done specific to town meeting members in the precinct and or interested residents we've heard from those specific precincts. We can open it up to the subscribers, I'm sure, just to have a more holistic conversation and make sure we're capturing more people. So I'll say in short, yes, we'll blast the subscribers with it.
So for anyone still left in the room and for anyone watching at home, there's like a million cameras in this room. You can also follow the Town of Reading Facebook page because I know they were posted there. They're posted on the Reading Parenting Network by a whole bunch of people. And there's also the Town Manager Minute, which I hope will continue after Fidel sadly departs the town, not life. And thank you. It's been a long day. I hope you adjourn soon for your own sake.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom that has their hand raised? I mean, if anyone else has burning questions, right, like, we'll take them, but a lot was said.
I need to make Christmas
All right.
cookies. I have other things
This
to
late?
do now. Maybe.
And thank you, right? All the
Thank
input is
you.
definitely
Yeah.
helpful,
Yes.
right? You never get the right thing first time out, so we'll circle around and see what it looks like
And
next.
zoning's always so much fun.
It's so easy to explain.
Thank you. Have a good night, all.
I guess, so I guess for your guys', thank you guys. For your sake, I mean, yes, we'll probably like continue to the 22nd, but we have a lot of work to try to do in between now and then. And I guess our takeaways or my takeaways are try to see if we can find other pockets of land that could fit this in outside of the half mile. And I would likely focus on open space, schools, or other amenities to center that around.
I have a suggestion. And I will preface this by I have orchestrated my entire life around not getting in my car unless it's for like an adventure to go skiing and hiking or something. I really dislike driving, but a point was made earlier tonight, and I think it is just a reality of Reading that we are an extremely convenient town to get on and off the freeway.
Yeah.
And I think we would be kidding ourselves if people don't sometimes choose Reading because it's an easy commuting town, and we might want to look at corridors. As much as it like runs against my ethos, look at corridors that are compatible with that.
Agreed.
Yeah, I do not disagree with that.
Yeah, like
I
we are,
agree,
we're an MBTA community, and one of my
But
friends who
we're-
grew up here described it as the most convenient town in the world, based on our easy
Between this
on-off
and
access.
that's why I
Yeah.
Yes, no, I considered that as well, and I didn't include it in that short list, but yes, definitely
Sorry.
going to consider it.
I think one of the issues with that is there's, at some of the areas that are close to the highway, a lot of the streets are not networks of streets, they're dead ends.
Yes, yeah.
So it's,
It's
from a
challenging.
traffic point of view and an infrastructure point of view,
Right.
it's hard to have a lot more development in those. So there's challenges looking for those neighborhoods or areas that would meet the requirement.
Right, yeah, agreed, thank you. So we'll primarily focus on that. There's a bit of comment of like 40R or commercial use being considered in this and mixed use. We didn't really get a clear consensus on should we really be pushing for that. There's a lot of comment that we should. We can look at that, but I guess I can also more clearly express the limitations that MBTA communities and commercial development has. So we'll take a look at it and we can re-summarize what amendments would need to be made to either business B or business A. And that would include dimensional controls and uses like mixed use being now by right instead of special permit in business A. So we can summarize those and have the conversation, but also if we're cognizant that this is the form in housing, if we can disperse it, if we can start to get into the bylaw too.
Yeah, next meeting, we definitely need to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we need to be clear. I mean, I heard a number of people tonight saying, why can't we count postmark? And in order to count it, we'd have to allow postmark on every single corner.
Right, we'd have to say 50 units
Yeah.
density.
It also wasn't built by right, right?
That's what I mean, we would have to allow that by right everywhere, and I think we just need to be very clear about what those implications are, because it's going to be a point of discussion.
So we'll try to tackle that in the next 3 weeks and hopefully get you guys some information, everybody and anybody. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you guys.
Oh, can I move to adjourn?
I'll second.
All those in favor? All right.
Thank you everybody on the Zoom. Thank you everybody here.